"Excuse me, but I believe you're in my seat," Zora Phillips said calmly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the first-class cabin. She stood in the aisle of International Airlines Flight 847, clutching her boarding pass in one hand and her worn leather backpack in the other. The recycled air of the cabin felt cool against her skin, carrying the mingled scents of cologne coffee and the distinct synthetic freshness of a recently cleaned aircraft. Rebecca Harlow, the blonde woman reclining comfortably in seat 1A, didn't bother looking up from her tablet. "I think you're mistaken," she replied, fingers continuing to scroll through her document. Her voice carried the clipped cadence of someone accustomed to ending conversations rather than starting them. "This is my seat." Zora's mouth went dry. A familiar tightness formed in her chest. Not anxiety exactly, but the heightened awareness that came with being scrutinized. She took a measured breath, feeling the slight restriction of her MIT sweatshirt against her shoulders as she inhaled. "My boarding pass says 1A, she said, extending the printed ticket toward Rebecca. "Could you please check yours?" Only then did Rebecca look up, her gaze moving from Zora's face to her simple jeans and MIT sweatshirt, then back to her face. A slight frown appeared between her perfectly sculpted eyebrows. The overhead lights reflected off her polished gold watch as she tilted her wrist. "There must be some confusion," Rebecca said, her tone now sharp and dismissive. "First class is completely booked. Perhaps you misread your ticket." She emphasized first class as though the very concept should be foreign to the teenager standing before her. The line of passengers behind Zora was growing. The shuffling of feet and muffled sighs created a soundtrack of impatience. Zora felt heat rising up her neck, the physiological betrayal of her discomfort, despite her outward calm. A flight attendant approached her name badge reading Maria Rodriguez. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step punctuating the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Maria asked, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension. Her perfume, something floral and expensive, momentarily overpowered the cabin's recycled air. "Yes," Zora and Rebecca said simultaneously. Rebecca continued. "This young woman seems to think she has my seat." She said young woman with the faintest emphasis, as if Zora's age was somehow relevant to the validity of her claim. Zora remained calm as she handed her boarding pass to Maria. The paper trembled slightly between her fingers, though her voice remained steady. "My ticket clearly says 1A. Maria glanced at the boarding pass, then at Zora, a flicker of doubt crossing her features before her professional mask returned. "Let me see your boarding pass as well, ma'am," she said to Rebecca. With obvious reluctance, Rebecca produced her ticket, the motion accompanied by an exaggerated sigh. "This is ridiculous," she muttered loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. "I've never encountered this issue before." Maria examined both passes, frowning slightly. The overhead air vent blew a cool stream directly onto Zora's forehead, making her increasingly aware of the perspiration gathering at her temples. "Ms. Harlow, your assigned seat is actually 12B in economy," Maria said, her tone suggesting she was delivering unpleasant news to a valued customer rather than correcting an error. Rebecca's face flushed. The color rose from her neck to her cheeks in mottled patches, clashing with her precisely applied blush. "That's impossible. I always fly first class." "Check again." Her fingers tapped rapidly against the armrest, gold rings clicking against the polished surface like an impatient metronome. Meanwhile, passengers continued boarding, many glancing curiously at the unfolding drama. The narrow aisle felt increasingly claustrophobic as more bodies pressed forward, luggage bumping against seats and shoulders. In business class, a distinguished black man in his late 40s sat quietly observing the situation with keen interest. Isaiah Phillips wore no outward signs of his considerable wealth and influence, just a simple gray Henley and dark jeans. But his eyes missed nothing as he watched his daughter stand her ground. His stillness contrasted sharply with the movement around him, like a boulder in a stream. "I've verified both tickets," Maria said, glancing nervously toward other waiting passengers. "Ms. Phillips is correctly assigned to 1A. Rebecca straightened in the seat, making no move to collect her belongings. Her manicured fingernails dug slightly into the leather armrests. "Look, there's clearly been an error in your system. I've been a platinum member for 15 years. Her voice took on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to corporate presentations. "I'm the chief investment officer at Hartford Financial. We manage a portfolio of over $30 billion. I can't possibly sit in economy." She emphasized $30 billion as if the amount itself should resolve the seating dispute. Zora remained still, her expression neutral despite the growing knot in her stomach. The weight of expectation pressed against her shoulders, the unspoken question of whether she belonged in spaces reserved for people who looked nothing like her. She could feel her glucose monitor vibrating softly against her wrist beneath her sleeve, a gentle reminder of her physical vulnerability in this increasingly stressful situation. "Perhaps we can sort this out," Maria suggested, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow carried perfectly to nearby seats. "Ms. Phillips, would you mind taking a seat in economy until we clarify this situation? We'll compensate you for the inconvenience, of course." She leaned closer, her breath smelling of mint gum as she added, "Just until we depart." The cabin fell quiet, passengers pausing their conversations to watch. Zora felt their eyes on her, some curious, some embarrassed, some eager for drama. The weight of their collective gaze pressed against her skin like physical touch. "No," Zora said quietly but firmly. "My boarding pass says 1A. That's my assigned seat." Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her breathing steady, a technique her father had taught her for maintaining composure during high-stress situations. Rebecca scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "This is ridiculous. I have meetings to prepare for. I can't waste time on this." She flicked an invisible piece of lint from her silk blouse, the gesture deliberate and performative. "I understand," Zora replied. "Which is why it would be helpful if you move to your assigned seat so we can all continue with our day." The words came out steadier than she felt her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "Never apologize for occupying space that's rightfully yours." A few passengers chuckled nervously. The sound rippled through the cabin like a pebble dropped in still water. Rebecca's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. The question hung in the air, weighted with assumed importance. "No," Zora answered honestly. "Just as you don't know who I am. All I know is that 1A is my seat." The words weren't a challenge, merely a statement of fact, but the silence that followed suggested she'd broken some unwritten rule of deference. Maria looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. The sound of her polyester uniform rustling seemed unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Ms. Harlow, I'm afraid I must ask you to move to your assigned seat. We need to complete boarding." Her customer service smile had slipped, revealing the strain beneath. Rebecca didn't budge. Her perfume, something expensive with notes of jasmine and sandalwood, seemed to intensify with her anger. "Get your supervisor. This is unacceptable." Each word was precisely enunciated, the cadence of corporate authority. As Maria spoke quietly into her headset, Zora stood motionless in the aisle, her face a careful mask concealing the turbulence beneath. The strap of her backpack cut into her shoulder, the weight of her medical supplies a constant reminder of what was at stake. In her 17 years, she had learned that showing emotion often gave others permission to dismiss you, to label you as aggressive if angry, oversensitive if hurt. The cabin lights seemed to brighten as her focus narrowed, the background conversations fading to a dull murmur. From his vantage point in business class, Isaiah Phillips continued his silent observation, his finger hovering over his phone screen. The lines around his eyes deepened slightly, the only outward sign of his concern. He had promised himself he would let Zora handle this situation. She was more than capable, but he remained ready to intervene if necessary, watching his daughter face a battle he knew all too well. His own heart rate had increased, though decades of business negotiations had taught him to maintain an outward appearance of complete calm. The familiar metallic taste of anger touched the back of his tongue. Isaiah Phillips hadn't always been a man who could bring an entire airline to its knees with a single phone call. 25 years ago, he had been a scholarship student, sleeping on a friend's couch, coding through the night, while working 2 jobs during the day. The memory of those early struggles remained vivid, the ache in his back from the lumpy couch, the perpetual caffeine jitters, the constant calculations about whether to spend money on food or bus fare. His breakthrough had come not from luck, but from persistence, creating an AI platform that revolutionized medical diagnostics when everyone said it couldn't be done. He remembered the exact moment it first worked properly. The green text scrolling across his second-hand monitor at 3:47 a.m., identifying patterns in medical imaging that human radiologists had missed. He had sat there stunned as tears streamed down his face, not just because the algorithm worked, but because he knew it would save lives. Now, as the founder and CEO of Phillips Innovations, his net worth exceeded $8.7 billion. His technologies were integrated into healthcare systems worldwide. Yet he still chose to fly commercial, occasionally blending in with other passengers, to observe how the world operated when people didn't know who he was. It was a practice that had informed his business decisions for years, seeing systems as they truly functioned, rather than how they presented themselves when a VIP was watching. "Show me how you treat your most vulnerable customer," he often told his executive team, "and I'll show you the true character of your organization." Today's flight was supposed to be different. This wasn't one of his anonymous observation trips. He was accompanying Zora to Paris for her presentation at the Global Tech Summit, where she would introduce NeuraSense to the international community. He had suggested they fly private, but Zora had insisted on commercial. "How will we know if NeuraSense works in real-world conditions, if we're always in a bubble?" She had argued over breakfast 3 days ago, gesturing with her fork for emphasis, nearly sending a piece of waffle flying across the kitchen. "Besides, I need to be around actual people to refine the emotional recognition algorithms." Her logic was impeccable as always. Isaiah could still picture her sitting at their kitchen island laptop surrounded by medical journals, her braids falling forward as she leaned over her calculations. So much like Amara, it sometimes took his breath away. Isaiah smiled faintly at the memory. Zora had inherited her mother's determination along with her brilliance. Amara Phillips had been the steadying force in their family until cancer took her 3 years ago. A brilliant neurologist, she had provided the medical expertise that complemented Isaiah's technological vision, helping him refine his early AI diagnostic tools. He could still hear Amara's laugh, rich and warm, filling their home office as they worked late into the night during those early years of the company. "You've built a system that can recognize tumors," she'd said. "But can it recognize joy, pain, fear? That's where the real revolution will happen." The memory was so vivid, he could almost smell her favorite jasmine tea, feel the warmth of her shoulder pressed against his as they huddled over code. After Amara's death, Zora had channeled her grief into creating NeuraSense, a revolutionary wearable device that helped nonverbal children with autism communicate by translating micro-expressions and physiological signals into emotional data. At 14, she had conceptualized the technology, sketching the initial designs in the margins of her mother's funeral program. By 16, she had a working prototype. Now, at 17, she was preparing to present it to the world's leading medical technology experts. But first, she had to claim her rightful seat. Isaiah watched as another flight attendant joined Maria. The new arrival, a young white man whose name tag read James Whitman, looked nervously between the two women. His uniform was crisp, but his hands fidgeted at his sides, betraying his discomfort with the escalating situation. The fabric of his vest caught the overhead lighting, the airline's logo gleaming briefly as he shifted position. In the first-class cabin, Rebecca Harlow remained firmly planted in 1A arms, crossed chin raised in defiance. Her body language screamed territorial dominance, legs slightly spread to occupy maximum space, belongings arranged to create a visible boundary. The standoff continued, the air growing thicker with tension. Isaiah's thoughts drifted back to a similar moment from Zora's childhood. She had been 9 years old, attending a prestigious science camp where she was the only black girl. During the robotics competition, her project had mysteriously malfunctioned. Later, they discovered that another student had tampered with her code. When confronted, the boy's parents had suggested that perhaps Zora wasn't ready for such an advanced program. Maybe she'd be more comfortable in the general science track, the father had said, his condescension thinly veiled as concern. Isaiah had been furious, ready to escalate the situation to the camp directors, possibly even pull funding from the entire program. Phillips Innovations was a major sponsor. But Amara had placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Watch," she'd whispered. "Watch what our daughter does." Instead of arguing, Zora had stayed up all night rebuilding her robot, making it better than before. Her small desk lamp had cast a golden glow across her determined face, as her fingers flew over the keyboard, rewriting the code from scratch. The sound of her typing had been a steady rhythm through the night, occasionally punctuated by the soft hum of motors as she tested each component. She won the competition the next day, her expression serene as she accepted the trophy, while the boy and his parents watched in stunned silence. When asked how she felt about the win, 9-year-old Zora had simply said, "The robot speaks for itself. No accusations, no complaints, just irrefutable excellence." That same composed determination showed on her face now, as she stood in the aisle refusing to be displaced. The set of her shoulders, the steady gaze, the quiet insistence on what was rightfully hers, all of it, pure Amara. Isaiah felt a familiar mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride in her strength. Sorrow that she needed to be so strong, so young. Amara should have been here to see this, their daughter standing tall, unwavering in her conviction. The absence of Amara still felt like a physical thing, a hollow space beside him that nothing could fill. "What would you do, Amara?" he whispered to himself. The words escaped as barely a breath, but saying them brought her closer somehow. The answer came immediately in his mind in Amara's voice. "The same thing you're doing. Let her fight her own battles, but be ready to step in if she needs you." Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, the situation was escalating. James was now checking both boarding passes on his tablet, the blue light illuminating his increasingly anxious expression. "Ms. Harlow," he said cautiously, "our system confirms that Ms. Phillips was assigned seat 1A during online check-in yesterday. Your reservation was changed to economy approximately 3 hours ago." "That's preposterous." Rebecca snapped the word, punctuated by a sharp hand gesture that sent her bracelet jangling. "I never changed my reservation. I've been in meetings all morning." Her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone unaccustomed to having her statements questioned. Isaiah knew exactly what had happened. Rebecca had likely been automatically downgraded when Zora checked in. International airlines, like many carriers, oversold their premium cabins, assuming that a certain percentage of passengers wouldn't show up. When all confirmed first-class passengers checked in, the system had bumped the last person who had booked, evidently Rebecca, to economy. Rather than accept this routine airline practice, Rebecca had decided that the black teenager must be the one who didn't belong. The algorithm had made a neutral decision based on timing. Rebecca had made a biased assumption based on appearance. It was a familiar pattern, one Isaiah had encountered countless times throughout his career. Early on, he had been mistaken for janitorial staff in his own company building. "The elevators aren't being cleaned right now," a vice president had told him dismissively, not recognizing the founder of the company he worked for. Even after his success became widely known, he was still occasionally asked to show extra ID at high-end hotels, or questioned when entering exclusive clubs. The subtle shift in security guards' postures, the barely perceptible narrowing of receptionists' eyes, all part of a silent language that said, "Prove you belong here." He had taught Zora from an early age. Your presence will be questioned in spaces they don't expect to see you. Never question yourself. He demonstrated the principle by example, walking into board meetings and venture capital firms with unshakable confidence, refusing to perform the ritual of over-explaining his credentials that so many seem to expect. Zora had learned the lesson well. He could see it in her posture now, straight, but not stiff, confident, but not aggressive, taking up exactly the space she was entitled to. No more, no less. The diabetes had complicated things, of course. Diagnosed at 12, Zora had adapted to managing her condition with the same methodical approach she applied to everything else. That first terrifying trip to the emergency room was still vivid in Isaiah's memory. The pallor of Zora's skin, the clinical beeping of monitors, the antiseptic smell that seemed to burn his nostrils. After the diagnosis, she had transformed their home into a laboratory of sorts, tracking every meal, every blood sugar reading, every insulin dose, with scientific precision. The NeuraSense prototype on her wrist, disguised as a simple fitness tracker, not only gathered data for her autism communication project, but also monitored her glucose levels, sending alerts to her phone when adjustments were needed. The device represented both her brilliant mind and her vulnerable body innovation born from necessity. First-class accommodations weren't a luxury for her. They were a practical consideration for a flight this long. The extra space allowed her to manage her medical supplies more easily, and the guaranteed meal service helped her maintain stable blood sugar levels. Isaiah had insisted on the arrangement, not out of privilege, but out of parental concern for her well-being. Isaiah shifted in his seat, resisting the urge to move forward. The leather creaked beneath him, the sound lost in the ambient noise of the cabin. Zora had this under control. She always did. Still, his muscles tensed, ready to rise if needed. His phone vibrated with a notification. A message from Sofia Alvarez, a tech journalist he knew, who apparently was also on this flight. "Is that your daughter in first class?" The woman refusing to move is making quite a scene. CIO of Hartford Financial, from what I'm hearing. "Should I be recording this?" Isaiah typed a brief reply. "Yes. Please don't intervene. But if you're recording, keep doing so. This may become relevant." His fingers moved swiftly across the screen muscle memory from thousands of similar messages. As he sent the message, he noticed an elderly white man with silver hair, standing up in the first-class cabin. Dr. Thomas Blackwell. Isaiah recognized him from academic circles. The distinguished professor of ethics was approaching the ongoing confrontation, his movements deliberate but unhurried. The overhead light caught in his silver hair, creating a momentary halo effect that seemed oddly appropriate, given his reputation as a moral authority. Isaiah smiled slightly. Perhaps Zora would have an unexpected ally. Blackwell had been a vocal advocate for equity in academic spaces for decades. More importantly, he had been Amara's mentor during her postdoctoral work at Columbia. The connection felt significant, almost preordained. In the aisle, Zora remained steady, her expression unchanged despite the growing tension. The weight of her medical kit pressed against her hip inside her backpack, a constant reminder of what was truly at stake. Her glucose monitor vibrated again, a gentle warning that her levels were starting to rise in response to stress. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, trying to center herself amid the chaos. Young Lady Rebecca said, her voice carrying through the cabin with the practiced projection of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms. "I understand you're disappointed, but making a scene won't change the fact that there's been a mistake." The words, "young lady," hung in the air, weighted with condescension. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, the leather upholstery creaking like a Greek chorus, commenting on the unfolding drama. A businessman in 2B suddenly became intensely interested in his shoes. Zora took a slow, measured breath. The recycled air felt cool in her nostrils, carrying the faint antiseptic scent used to clean the cabin. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips as they gripped her boarding pass. The only mistake, she replied calmly, is that you're sitting in a seat that isn't assigned to you. Dr. Blackwell cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. His tweed jacket smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and old books as he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his deep voice carrying the gravitas of his 70 years. "I couldn't help but overhear. The young woman's boarding pass clearly shows she's assigned to that seat. Airline policy is quite straightforward in these matters." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, the fine lines around them deepening. Her perfume seemed to intensify with her anger. "This doesn't concern you, sir." The word "sir" carried no respect, delivered instead like a dismissal. "Actually," Dr. Blackwell continued pleasantly, his New England accent becoming more pronounced as a fellow passenger whose flight is being delayed by this situation, "it very much concerns me. And as someone who has witnessed similar misunderstandings over the years, I feel compelled to speak up." His emphasis on misunderstandings suggested he understood exactly what was happening. The ambient sounds of the cabin seemed to recede as the confrontation intensified, the rustling of newspapers, the click of seatbelts, the murmur of conversations, all fading to background noise. The focus narrowed to the triangle formed by Zora, Rebecca, and the intervening Dr. Blackwell. Maria stepped forward again, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. A bead of sweat had formed at her temple despite the cool cabin air. "Ms. Phillips, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy for now. We can sort this out once we're airborne." Her voice carried the slightly desperate tone of someone trying to find the path of least resistance. "No," Zora said firmly, feeling the word resonate in her chest. The medical alert bracelet beneath her sleeve felt suddenly heavier. "I need to be in first class." "Everyone wants to be in first class," Rebecca muttered, rolling her eyes dramatically. Her gold earrings caught the light as she turned her head, creating momentary flashes like camera bulbs. "I need to be in first class," Zora repeated, emphasizing each word carefully, "because I'm diabetic. I require consistent meal service and space for my medical supplies." The admission felt vulnerable, exposing a personal detail she usually kept private. The subtle vibration of her glucose monitor against her wrist reminded her that this wasn't just about principle, it was about her physical well-being. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Maria's face, her professional mask slipping momentarily. The overhead lighting cast harsh shadows under her eyes, revealing the strain beneath her composed exterior. "You didn't mention any medical requirements during booking." "I shouldn't have to," Zora replied, feeling heat rise in her cheeks despite her efforts to remain calm. The cabin suddenly felt warmer, the air thicker. "My seat assignment is clear, and my medical condition is noted in your passenger profile." James tapped on his tablet, the blue light illuminating his increasingly troubled expression. He bit his lower lip, a nervous habit that made him appear younger than his 29 years. "She's right. There's a medical note on her reservation." He turned the tablet slightly, showing Maria the screen. "Type 1 diabetes requires consistent meal timing and access to refrigeration for supplies." From several rows back, a woman with a sleek bob haircut and tortoiseshell glasses raised her phone slightly. Sophia Alvarez, tech journalist for Digital Frontiers magazine, was discreetly recording the encounter. The small red light on her phone blinked steadily, documenting every word. She had recognized Zora immediately. The young genius behind NeuraSense was featured in her upcoming cover story. "Is this how international airlines typically treats passengers with medical needs?" Sophia asked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her voice carried the precise diction of someone accustomed to recording audio for publication. Maria shot her a warning look, color rising to her cheeks. "Ma'am, please don't record. It's against our policy." Her fingers nervously adjusted her name tag, the metal pin catching briefly on the fabric of her uniform. "Actually," Sophia replied, not lowering her phone, "your policy prohibits recording of crew members performing safety duties. This isn't a safety matter. It's a customer service issue." She recited the policy with the confidence of someone who had researched it thoroughly, perhaps anticipating this very response. Murmurs spread through the cabin as more passengers began paying attention. The sound built gradually, like waves approaching shore. Magazines were lowered, headphones removed. Conversations paused as the drama commanded increasing attention. Rebecca's face flushed deeper, the color extending past her expertly applied blush. A muscle twitched in her jaw as she clenched her teeth. "This is absurd. I've never been treated this way." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrests, the leather creaking under the pressure. "Nor have I," Zora said quietly, meeting Rebecca's gaze directly for the first time. Yet here we are. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. James leaned closer to Maria. His cologne, something citrusy and inexpensive, momentarily overpowering her more sophisticated scent. "Maria," he whispered, though his voice carried in the tense silence. "We should follow protocol here. Medical accommodations take precedence over status upgrades. It's in the manual." Maria's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. The overhead lights reflected off her glossy lipstick as she turned back to Zora. "Ms. Phillips," she said, her voice now clipped and official. "For the smooth operation of this flight, I need to ask you to accept a seat in economy. We'll provide a voucher for future travel." The offer hung in the air, as insulting in its assumption as it was in its inadequacy. Several passengers exchanged glances, their silent communication more eloquent than words. Dr. Blackwell shook his head, the motion causing a lock of silver hair to fall across his forehead. He brushed it back with a practiced gesture. "That's not the correct procedure when a passenger has a valid boarding pass and a documented medical need." His tone wasn't confrontational, but carried the unmistakable authority of someone stating facts rather than opinions. "With all due respect." "Sir," Maria replied, emphasizing sir, with the same dismissive tone Rebecca had used. "I'm following company protocol. Are you?" came a new voice. A Hispanic man in his early 30s seated in the second row had joined the conversation. His accent carried the melodic cadence of Puerto Rico. "Because I fly this route weekly, and I've never seen this protocol applied before." He made air quotes around protocol, the gesture drawing a few nervous laughs from nearby passengers. Rebecca stood abruptly, the sudden movement causing her to bump against the tray table. Her water glass wobbled precariously before settling. "This is ridiculous. I'm not giving up my seat to accommodate someone who clearly bought a discounted ticket or used miles. I paid full fare." She straightened her silk blouse with a sharp tug, the fabric rustling softly. "So did I?" Zora said, her voice steady, despite the flutter of anxiety in her stomach. The glucose monitor vibrated again against her wrist, more insistently this time. "Right," Rebecca scoffed, looking Zora up and down, taking in her simple clothing. A teenager paid $12,000 for a first-class ticket to Paris. Her tone dripped with sarcasm, each word precision-tooled to cut. Zora met her gaze statelily. "My ability to pay isn't relevant. My boarding pass is." She held up the document again, the paper now slightly crumpled from being gripped so tightly for so long. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tenser. The air conditioning seemed to falter momentarily, or perhaps it was just the perception of rising heat as emotions escalated. Other passengers were now openly watching, some recording with their phones, despite Maria's attempts to discourage them. The distinctive sound of iPhone camera shutters clicked sporadically, providing a staccato soundtrack to the confrontation. "Ms. Rodriguez," James said hesitantly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His uniform shoes squeaked slightly against the floor. "The system confirms Ms. Phillips is assigned to 1A. We should check again." Maria interrupted, her tone carrying a warning. "There must be a glitch." The words emerged through barely parted lips, her smile now completely gone. As James tapped on his tablet, Zora carefully removed her backpack and unzipped the front pocket, extracting a small case containing her glucose monitor and emergency insulin. The black case had a distinctive medical alert symbol embossed on the top, the red and white standing out starkly against the dark material. "I need to check my levels," she explained quietly, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "This situation is affecting my blood sugar." The admission wasn't a plea for sympathy, but a statement of medical fact. Dr. Blackwell moved closer protectively, his presence creating a buffer between Zora and the increasingly hostile flight attendant. The scent of his aftershave, something old-fashioned, with notes of sandalwood, mixed with the smell of his tweed jacket. Perhaps Captain Turner should be informed about the delay. He suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't merely a suggestion. "That won't be necessary," Maria insisted, a note of panic entering her voice. She glanced toward the cockpit, her expression betraying her concern about escalating the situation further. But it was too late. The cockpit door opened with a distinctive pneumatic hiss, and Captain Evelyn Turner emerged. Her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, her uniform impeccable. She moved with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to command, her footsteps firm and deliberate against the carpet. "What's the situation?" she asked, surveying the scene with practiced efficiency. Her voice carried the slight raspiness of someone who had been speaking on radios for decades. Maria stepped forward quickly, her heels clicking against the floor. "Just a minor seating misunderstanding, Captain. We're handling it." Her voice had shifted to a higher register, the words coming out faster than before. "It doesn't look minor," Captain Turner observed as she noted the crowd of watching passengers, the visibly upset Rebecca and the calmly composed Zora checking her glucose levels. The cabin lights reflected off the captain's wings, sending brief flashes across the cabin. "What's the issue?" Before Maria could answer, James spoke up, his voice steadier than before. "A passenger is seated in the wrong seat and refusing to move, Captain. Ms. Phillips here has the correct assignment to 1A, but Ms. Harlow is unwilling to relocate to her assigned seat in economy." Captain Turner's gaze swept over the scene, lingering on Zora's medical device. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Is that a glucose monitor?" Zora nodded, glancing at the reading with a slight frown. "Yes, Captain. I'm type 1 diabetic. The numbers on the screen were higher than they should be, a direct result of the stress she was experiencing, and you're assigned to 1A. The captain's tone had shifted from questioning to confirming. "Yes, Captain." Zora held up her boarding pass again, the motion now automatic. Turner turned to Rebecca, her expression hardening again. The transition was subtle but unmistakable. A slight squaring of the shoulders, a minute tightening around the eyes. "Ms. Harlow, you need to move to your assigned seat immediately. We're already behind schedule." Rebecca's face contorted with indignation. Her cheeks flushed darker, and a vein became visible at her temple, pulsing with each accelerated heartbeat. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Hartford Financial. I manage over $30 billion in assets. Each title and number was emphasized, deployed like weapons. I will not be treated this way." "On this aircraft," Captain Turner replied evenly, her stance widening slightly in a subtle assertion of authority. "I'm the authority, Ms. Harlow, and I'm instructing you to take your assigned seat so we can depart." Rebecca didn't move. The scent of her perfume seemed to intensify further, becoming almost cloying in the confined space. "I want to speak to the airline's management. This is unacceptable." Her voice had taken on the clipped cadence she likely used when dressing down subordinates. "You can file a complaint after we land," Turner said, unmoved. "Right now, you need to comply with crew instructions." As this exchange continued, Zora glanced at her glucose monitor with increasing concern. The reading was significantly higher than it should be, stress affecting her levels more dramatically than she had anticipated. The small screen displayed numbers that would be meaningless to most observers, but told her exactly how her body was responding to this confrontation. She discreetly removed a small pill case from her medical kit and swallowed a tablet with a sip from her water bottle, the cool liquid soothing her increasingly dry throat. In business class, Isaiah watched the situation unfold with growing concern. His daughter was handling herself with remarkable composure, but the medical complication worried him. The diabetes had always been a shadow in their lives, since her diagnosis, manageable but ever-present, requiring constant vigilance. He opened a secure messaging app on his phone and typed a brief message to his executive assistant, possible situation developing on IA-847. Alert protocol team to stand by. Medical concern. Back in first class, Rebecca finally gathered her belongings, muttering under her breath as she did so. The sounds of zippers closing and papers shuffling punctuated her continued protests. But instead of moving toward economy, she simply shifted to seat 1B beside Zora's assigned spot, her movements deliberately slow and theatrical. "This is absurd," she said loudly, ensuring her voice carried to nearby rows. "I've never been so humiliated." She arranged her items in the new seat with exaggerated care, claiming the space as if it were rightfully hers. "Ms. Harlow," Captain Turner said firmly, the overhead lights catching the silver in her hair. "Your assigned seat is 12B. "I'm not sitting in economy," Rebecca insisted, her chin lifting defiantly. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head. "I'll take 1B if I can't have 1A, but I'm not moving to the back of the plane." Several passengers exchanged glances, the racial implications of her statement hanging in the air, unspoken, but unmistakable. A soft murmur rippled through the cabin, the collective intake of breath almost audible. Zora remained silent, her expression neutral, despite the turmoil she must have been feeling. Her hands remained steady as she carefully repacked her glucose monitor, each movement precise and controlled. She simply waited, the soft hum of the aircraft systems filling the silence. Maria whispered something to James, who reluctantly approached Rebecca. His Adam's apple bobbed nervously as he swallowed before speaking. "Ms. Harlow 1B is assigned to another passenger who hasn't boarded yet. You need to move to your assigned seat, then reassign them." Rebecca snapped the words, emerging like bullets. "I'm not moving." She crossed her legs and smoothed her skirt, the gesture of physical punctuation to her declaration. Captain Turner's expression hardened, the lines around her mouth deepening. "Ms. Harlow, this is your final warning. Move to your assigned seat, or you will be removed from this flight." The statement wasn't delivered as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact, inevitable as gravity. The cabin fell silent as passengers waited for Rebecca's response. The background hum of the aircraft seemed to grow louder in the absence of conversation, the ventilation system pushing cool air through the cabin in rhythmic pulses. After a long, tense moment, Rebecca stood up, gathering her belongings with deliberate slowness. Each item was collected with exaggerated care, stretching the process to its maximum duration. "I will be filing a formal complaint," she announced to no one in particular, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of corporate threat, "and canceling my company's contract with this airline." She emphasized canceling with particular relish, as if the word itself carried punitive power. As Rebecca finally moved toward the economy section, Captain Turner turned to Zora. Her expression softened, professional concern replacing authoritative command. "I apologize for the delay, Ms. Phillips. Are you all right?" "Yes," Captain Zora replied, though the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her backpack suggested otherwise. "Thank you." As Zora finally took her assigned seat, placing her backpack carefully under the seat in front of her, she felt a moment of relief. The cool leather felt reassuring against her back as she exhaled slowly, allowing some of the tension to leave her body. She glanced out the window at the tarmac, watching ground crew members load luggage into the plane's belly, their bright vests moving in choreographed efficiency against the gray concrete. The confrontation appeared to be over. She was wrong. Zora settled into seat 1A, arranging her medical supplies within easy reach. The cool leather felt reassuring against her back as she exhaled slowly, allowing some of the tension to leave her body. She glanced out the window at the tarmac, watching ground crew members load luggage into the plane's belly, their fluorescent vests creating bright spots of color against the gray concrete. The moment of peace was short-lived. "Excuse me," Maria said, appearing beside Zora's seat like an unwelcome apparition. The scent of her perfume arrived a fraction of a second before she did an olfactory warning. "We need to verify your medical condition before takeoff." Zora looked up surprised. The overhead reading light cast harsh shadows across Maria's face, making her expression difficult to read. "My condition is noted in my passenger profile, as your colleague confirmed." She kept her voice neutral, though her pulse quickened again, the brief respite evaporating. "Yes, but we need to see documentation," Maria insisted, her fingers tapping impatiently against her tablet. The rhythmic sound seemed unnecessarily loud in the otherwise quiet cabin. "It's protocol for passengers with special needs." Dr. Blackwell, who had returned to his seat across the aisle, looked up sharply from his book. The spine creaked as he closed it with deliberate care. "That's not standard procedure," he said, his academic diction precise and measured. "Medical conditions are verified during booking, not during boarding." Nevertheless, Maria continued her emphasis on the word, suggesting it overrode all objections. "We need to ensure proper documentation." Zora maintained her composure as she reached for her phone, the screen illuminating her face with a soft blue glow. "I have my medical ID app," she said, opening the application that displayed her diabetes diagnosis, emergency contacts, and medication details. The information was organized in neat categories, her mother's legacy of scientific precision, evident in the meticulous record-keeping. Maria scrutinized the screen, then frowned, her lipstick creasing slightly at the corners of her mouth. This could be anyone's information. "Do you have official documentation with your name on it?" A murmur of disbelief rippled through the nearby passengers. The collective sound of disapproval seemed to physically move through the cabin like a wave. Sofia Alvarez, still recording discreetly, shook her head in disbelief, her earrings swinging with the motion. "Are you asking other passengers with medical conditions for documentation?" Zora asked quietly. Her question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely inquisitive, seeking to understand the parameters of this apparent policy. "That's not relevant," Maria replied, shifting her weight slightly. The movement caused her polyester uniform to rustle the synthetic fabric, creating a subtle scratching sound. "It seems extremely relevant," Dr. Blackwell interjected, his deep voice carrying the weight of decades of ethical discourse. "Selective enforcement of policies is problematic at best." The words were carefully chosen, academic in their precision, but unmistakable in their implication. James appeared again, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Beads of sweat had formed along his hairline, despite the cool cabin air. "Maria, I don't think this is necessary. Her condition is verified in the system." His voice carried a nervous tremor, the words slightly rushed. Maria shot him a warning look, her eyes narrowing to slits. "James, please attend to the other passengers." The dismissal was barely disguised as a request. "If you can't provide documentation," Maria continued, turning back to Zora, "we may need to reconsider your seating assignment." The threat hung in the air, as tangible as the recycled air flowing from the overhead vents. In business class, Isaiah Phillips watched the situation deteriorate. The muscles in his jaw tightened as he observed the continued harassment of his daughter. Each breath became more measured as he controlled his growing anger. His daughter was being harassed, plain and simple. The leather armrest creaked under the pressure of his grip as he began composing a text to International Airlines CEO Gerald Matthews, whom he knew personally from various business functions. The message was concise but loaded. "Gerald, I'm on IA 847, witnessing egregious treatment of a minor with medical needs by your crew. This will not end well if not addressed immediately." His thumb hovered over the send button, but he waited, giving the situation one more chance to resolve itself. Back in first class, Zora took a deep breath, the air cool in her nostrils. "My medical supplies are evidence of my condition," she said, gesturing to her glucose monitor. The device's display still showed elevated levels, the numbers a silent testament to the physical toll of this confrontation. "And as I've mentioned, my condition is documented in your system. But if you'd like additional verification," she pulled out a small card from her wallet, her medical alert ID, and handed it to Maria. The laminated surface reflected the cabin lights as it passed between them. The flight attendant examined it briefly, her expression unchanging, before reluctantly returning it. "Fine." Maria said, the word clipped short. "But I need to check your carry-on items for any prohibited medical devices." She reached toward Zora's backpack, her painted nails like talons. "What?" Zora asked, genuinely confused. The question came out sharper than intended, her composure finally showing cracks. She placed a protective hand on her backpack, feeling the vital supplies within. "Why? Certain medical equipment needs special clearance for cabin use," Maria explained, though her tone suggested she was inventing policy on the spot. Her eyes darted briefly toward other passengers, gauging their reactions. Dr. Blackwell stood up again, his joints cracking audibly with the sudden movement. "This is becoming harassment," he said firmly, his academic reserve giving way to more direct language. "I'm a professor of medical ethics at Columbia, and I can assure you that what you're doing violates multiple regulations regarding treatment of passengers with medical conditions." His voice carried the weight of expertise and moral authority. Maria hesitated, clearly weighing her options. The cabin had grown quiet again, with multiple passengers now openly recording the interaction. The soft electronic tones of phones being unlocked punctuated the silence as more people prepared to document what was happening. From the rear of the first-class cabin, Rebecca Harlow reappeared, having apparently decided not to continue to economy. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor as she approached each step, deliberate and intrusive. "Is there a problem?" she asked, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Her lipstick had been freshly applied, the glossy surface catching the light as she spoke. "Ms. Harlow, you need to return to your assigned seat," James said with newfound firmness. He stepped forward physically, placing himself between Rebecca and Zora. "I'm just checking on the situation," Rebecca replied innocently, her hands raised in mock surrender. "It seems there might be a security concern." The words were carefully chosen, designed to escalate. "Security concern." Zora echoed disbelief, evident in her voice for the first time. The cool composure she had maintained began to crack her tone, rising slightly. "What are you implying?" "Well, if you can't verify your medical needs." Rebecca let the implication hang in the air, the unfinished sentence more damaging than any direct accusation. The tension in the cabin ratcheted up several notches. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath more labored. Sofia Alvarez stood up, no longer attempting to be discreet with her recording. Her camera was held at eye level now, deliberately documenting every word and gesture. "Let me understand this," Sofia said loudly, her journalist's training evident in her clear projection. "A passenger with a verified medical condition is being treated as a security risk because she's what? Young black female. Which part is triggering this extraordinary scrutiny?" The questions were pointed, but delivered with professional calm, designed to elicit response rather than shut down conversation. Maria turned toward Sofia, color rising in her cheeks. "Ma'am, please sit down and stop recording." Her voice had taken on a brittle quality, control slipping with each passing moment. "I'm a journalist with Digital Frontiers," Sofia replied, holding her ground. The overhead light glinted off her glasses as she adjusted them. "And I'm documenting what appears to be discriminatory treatment of a passenger." Captain Turner emerged from the cockpit, again her expression now one of barely contained anger. The door closed behind her with a definitive click. "What is going on here?" she demanded. "We're 20 minutes behind schedule." Her gaze swept the scene, taking in the multiple recording phones, the defiant Rebecca standing in the aisle, the visibly uncomfortable James, and the increasingly agitated Maria. Captain Maria began, her voice higher than before. "We're verifying a passenger's medical requirements." No, Dr. Blackwell interrupted his academic precision, giving way to righteous indignation. "What's happening is that this young woman is being subjected to unreasonable and discriminatory scrutiny after already proving she belongs in her assigned seat." His tweed jacket rustled as he gestured emphatically, the sound strangely domestic amid the tension. Captain Turner surveyed the scene, taking in the multiple recording phones, the defiant Rebecca standing in the aisle, the visibly uncomfortable James, and the increasingly agitated Maria. Her eyes narrowed as she processed the situation, decades of experience, allowing her to quickly assess what was happening. Ms. Harlow Turner said firmly, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command, "This is the last time I will tell you to return to your assigned seat. If you do not comply immediately, you will be removed from this flight." The ultimatum was delivered without drama, but with absolute certainty. Rebecca's face flushed with anger, the color clashing with her carefully applied makeup. "You can't speak to me that way. Do you know who I am?" The question emerged as it had before the repetition, suggesting it usually yielded the desired result. At this moment, Turner replied unmoved, "You are a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions, which is a federal offense." Her posture remained relaxed but alert, years of cockpit discipline evident in her controlled response to provocation. As this confrontation unfolded, Zora noticed with alarm that her backpack had been moved from its position under the seat in front of her. The familiar weight against her legs was gone. Her medical kit, which had been inside, was now missing. The realization sent a cold spike of fear through her chest. "Excuse me," she said, rising from her seat. Her voice remained steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "My medical supplies are gone." All eyes turned to her. The collective shift in attention was almost physical, a redirection of energy in the confined space. "What do you mean, gone?" Captain Turner asked, her professional concern immediate. "My kit was in my backpack." Zora explained, her voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "Someone moved my backpack, and now my insulin and emergency supplies are missing." She kept her tone clinical, factual, though her heart raced at the implications. Without those supplies, a 7-hour flight could become dangerous. Dr. Blackwell immediately began looking around the nearby seats and floor. His movements were methodical, despite his age, checking under seats and in overhead compartments. James joined the search, dropping to his knees to check under adjacent seats, his uniform pants gathering dust from the cabin floor. "When did you last see it?" Captain Turner asked, her tone now that of someone addressing an emergency rather than a dispute. "It was in my backpack when I sat down," Zora replied, keeping her voice level despite the growing anxiety. "Right before Ms. Rodriguez asked for my medical documentation." The implication was clear but unstated. All eyes turned to Maria, who looked genuinely surprised. Her hands raised defensively, palms out. "I didn't touch your backpack," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch. "I wouldn't do that." Rebecca made a small scoffing noise, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Perhaps you should have kept better track of your belongings." The words were delivered with a small, satisfied smile, as if she were imparting helpful advice rather than casting blame. The implication was clear, and it sent a ripple of disbelief through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disapproval. The collective judgment was almost palpable. Sophia moved closer, her camera still recording. The red light blinked steadily, documenting every moment. "Ms. Harlow, did you take this passenger's medical supplies?" The question was direct, journalistic in its clarity. "Of course not." Rebecca snapped her fingers, clutching her handbag more tightly. The leather creaked under the pressure. What a ridiculous accusation. James, who had been searching nearby, emerged from checking the seat pocket in front of 1B, where Rebecca had temporarily sat. In his hand was a small black case with a medical alert symbol. The Red Cross stood out starkly against the black material, instantly recognizable. "Is this it?" he asked Zora, holding it carefully, as if it might break. She nodded, relief evident on her face. "Yes, that's my emergency kit." The tension in her shoulders eased slightly, though her expression remained guarded. "It was in the seat pocket," James explained, looking troubled. His brow furrowed as he handed the kit to Zora, where Ms. Harlow was sitting earlier. All eyes turned to Rebecca, whose expression flickered between indignation and discomfort. The perfectly composed exterior showed cracks, a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, a momentary aversion of her gaze. "I found it on the floor," she said defensively, her voice losing some of its previous authority. "I put it in the seat pocket for safekeeping." The explanation sounded hollow even to her own ears, judging by her expression. "It was in my backpack," Zora countered quietly, her gaze direct and unwavering. Under the seat, Captain Turner's expression had grown thunderous. The overhead lights cast sharp shadows across her face, emphasizing the deep lines of anger forming around her mouth. "Ms. Harlow, did you remove medical supplies from another passenger's bag?" "I was just trying to help," Rebecca insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. She smoothed her skirt with nervous hands, the repetitive motion betraying her discomfort. "It must have fallen out." Dr. Blackwell shook his head, silver hair catching the light. "That case is designed not to fall out of anything. It's a secure medical container." His academic tone had returned, analyzing the claim with scholarly precision and finding it wanting. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely. What had begun as a seating dispute had escalated into something far more serious, tampering with a passenger's life-saving medical supplies. The air felt charged like the moments before a thunderstorm. Isaiah Phillips had seen enough. Rising from his seat in business class, he moved purposefully toward the first-class cabin. His movements were fluid and deliberate, carrying the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms without raising his voice. The time for silent observation was over. As he approached, he could hear Rebecca continuing to defend herself, her words coming faster now, less precisely chosen. "This is absurd. I'm being vilified for trying to help. This whole situation is—" She fell silent as Isaiah appeared beside her, his presence commanding immediate attention despite his casual attire. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath as he stopped beside Zora's seat. "My daughter's insulin," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that belied its softness, "is not something to be helped with." Each word was precisely enunciated, the cadence measured and controlled. Rebecca blinked, confusion evident on her face. The perfectly maintained facade cracked further as she processed this new information. "Your daughter." Isaiah moved past her to Zora's side, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. The gesture was both reassuring and claiming a father stepping in after allowing his daughter space to handle the situation herself. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening as he addressed Zora. Zora nodded, visibly relieved by his presence, but still maintaining her composure. "I'm okay, Dad." The simple acknowledgement carried layers of meaning between them. The revelation sent a ripple of whispers through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some now recognizing the man standing in the aisle. The name Phillips traveled in hushed tones, connection being made to Phillips' innovations, to the billions in market value, to the revolutionary healthcare technologies. Captain Turner stepped forward, reassessing the situation in light of this new development. "Sir, I need to ask you to return to your seat. We're trying to resolve this situation." Her tone remained professional, but with a new note of caution. "The situation," Isaiah replied calmly, his voice carrying the practiced modulation of countless boardroom negotiations, "is that my 17-year-old daughter was denied her assigned seat, subjected to discriminatory questioning about her medical condition, and then had her life-saving medication tampered with. I don't believe that's something I can simply observe from a distance any longer." The statement wasn't delivered as an accusation, but as a simple recitation of facts. Maria's face had paled to an ashen gray. Perspiration beaded visibly along her hairline, despite the cool cabin air. "Sir, we're following protocol." "Are you?" Isaiah asked, his tone mild, but his gaze piercing. The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Which protocol specifically calls for questioning a passenger's documented medical condition after seating verification? Which protocol involves moving a passenger's medical supplies without consent? Each question was delivered without anger, but with surgical precision. James looked like he wanted to disappear, his gaze fixed on the floor. Captain Turner's expression had shifted from anger to concern as she began to sense that this situation was escalating beyond a routine passenger dispute. "May I ask who you are, sir?" Turner inquired, her tone now cautious. The silver wings on her uniform caught the light as she shifted position. Isaiah Phillips reached into his pocket and produced a business card which he handed to the captain. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. Isaiah Phillips, CEO of Phillips Innovations. Turner's eyes widened as she read the card, recognition dawning on her face. The embossed logo caught the light as she tilted it slightly. "Mr. Phillips, what I'd like to know," Isaiah continued calmly, not waiting for her to complete the thought, "is why my daughter was treated this way when all evidence, her boarding pass, her reservation details, her documented medical condition, confirmed her right to be in seat 1A. The question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. The cabin had fallen completely silent now, the only sounds the gentle hum of the aircraft systems and the occasional electronic click of phones still recording the encounter. Rebecca Harlow, who had been watching this exchange with growing unease, attempted to reassert herself. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply moving to your assigned seat," Isaiah suggested, his tone conversational, but carrying an unmistakable edge, because that would be the appropriate action at this point. The suggestion was delivered as friendly advice, though the steel beneath was evident to everyone listening. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed without sound. For perhaps the first time in her professional life, she found herself utterly without leverage. The realization seemed to physically affect her. Her shoulders dropped slightly, her perfectly maintained posture faltering. Captain Turner made a decision. "Mr. Phillips, I apologize for this situation. Ms. Harlow, you need to move to your assigned seat now, or you will be escorted from this aircraft." The ultimatum was delivered with renewed authority, now backed by the knowledge of who was witnessing her actions. Rebecca finally seemed to understand the gravity of her position. Without another word, she gathered her remaining belongings and moved toward the economy section, the eyes of every passenger following her retreat. The soft rustle of her silk blouse seemed unnaturally loud in the silent cabin, each step marking her diminished status. But the situation was far from resolved. Isaiah turned to Captain Turner, his expression serious. "Captain, I believe we need to discuss what happens next." The statement wasn't a threat, but it carried the unmistakable weight of consequence. "What happens next?" Captain Turner replied, maintaining her professional demeanor, despite the tension, "is that we prepare for departure. I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Phillips." The overhead lights gleamed on her captain's bars as she straightened her uniform jacket. Isaiah shook his head slightly, the motion deliberate and measured. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Captain." His voice remained calm, but there was an unmistakable resolve in his tone that caused several nearby passengers to look up from their phones. "My daughter's medical supplies were tampered with. That's not an inconvenience, it's potentially life-threatening." The air in the cabin seemed to grow heavier with each word, the recycled oxygen carrying the weight of unresolved tension. A baby cried briefly in the main cabin, the sound quickly hushed by a parent's soothing whisper. Zora placed a hand on her father's arm, feeling the subtle tension in his muscles beneath the soft fabric of his Henley. "Dad, I'm okay. I have backup supplies in my checked luggage." Her voice was quiet, meant only for him, though. In the hushed cabin, it carried farther than intended. "That's not the point," Isaiah replied gently, covering her hand with his own. His wedding ring, still worn 3 years after Amara's death, caught the light briefly. "What happened here goes beyond a simple misunderstanding." Captain Turner glanced toward the cockpit, clearly weighing her options. The delay was already significant, and the atmosphere in the cabin remained charged with tension. Her shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath before she spoke again. "Mr. Phillips," she said carefully, choosing each word with evident consideration. "I understand your concerns. We can file a report once we're airborne, and I assure you the matter will be investigated thoroughly." She spoke with the measured cadence of someone trained to de-escalate situations. Isaiah considered this for a moment, then looked around at the first-class cabin, where several passengers were still recording the incident on their phones. The soft electronic tones of devices being unlocked and apps being opened provided a modern soundtrack to the confrontation. His gaze settled on Sofia Alvarez, whose professional-grade camera was capturing everything. The red recording light blinked steadily, documenting each moment. "Ms. Alvarez," he said, recognizing the journalist. "I believe you've been documenting this situation." The question was rhetorical, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. Sophia nodded, lowering her camera slightly, but not turning it off. "Every moment, Mr. Phillips." Her voice carried the clear diction of someone accustomed to recording audio for publication. "Good." Isaiah replied, his expression unreadable. "Because what we've witnessed here isn't isolated. It's part of a pattern that needs to be acknowledged and addressed." The statement wasn't delivered as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact, all the more powerful for its restraint. Dr. Blackwell stepped forward, the leather soles of his Oxford shoes making a distinctive sound against the cabin floor. "I concur. This goes beyond a seating dispute. It's about whose presence is questioned and whose is assumed valid." His academic vocabulary was precise, clinical in its assessment of what had transpired. Maria Rodriguez, who had been standing nearby, bristled visibly. Color returned to her previously pale face, rising from her neck to her cheeks in uneven patches. "This is not about race," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It's about following procedures." "Which procedures specifically?" Isaiah asked mildly, though his gaze was penetrating. The simple question hung in the air, unanswered and damning. "The one where my daughter's valid boarding pass was questioned, or the one where her medical supplies were removed from her possession?" The cabin temperature seemed to drop several degrees with the question. A passenger in the third row audibly inhaled the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. James Whitman, the junior flight attendant, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Beads of sweat had formed along his hairline despite the cool cabin air. "Sir," he said hesitantly, tugging at his uniform collar. "I don't think Ms. Rodriguez meant any harm." "Intent isn't the issue," Isaiah replied, his tone still measured and reasonable. "Impact is." The simple statement carried the weight of countless similar conversations throughout his career, distilled to its essence. Captain Turner, recognizing that the situation was only escalating, made another attempt to defuse it. Her posture shifted subtly, becoming more authoritative. "Mr. Phillips, if you'd like to file a formal complaint, we have procedures for that. But right now, we need to prepare for departure." Actually came a new voice from the cabin entrance. "I don't think we'll be departing just yet." All eyes turned to see a Hispanic man in an airport security uniform approaching. His badge identified him as Miguel Santos, head of terminal security. His shoes squeaked slightly against the floor as he moved down the aisle, the sound punctuating the silence. Captain Turner Santos said, with a nod of acknowledgement, "We've received multiple reports of a passenger's medical supplies being tampered with on this aircraft. That triggers an automatic security protocol." His accent carried a slight Puerto Rican cadence, but his English was precise and official. Maria's face paled again, the color draining visibly. "This is unnecessary. The situation is under control." Her fingers fidgeted with her name badge, betraying her nervousness despite her confident words. "That's not for you to determine," Santos replied evenly, his expression professional but firm. He turned to Zora, his tone softening slightly. "Ms. Phillips, I understand your medical supplies were moved without your consent." Zora nodded, straightening in her seat. "Yes, sir. My insulin kit was taken from my backpack and placed in a seat pocket." Her voice remained steady, the simple facts presented without embellishment. Santos's expression remained professional, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a serious matter. We need to document this incident before the flight can proceed." Captain Turner looked between Santos and the Phillips family, clearly recognizing that the situation had moved beyond her authority. The overhead lights highlighted the tension in her face as she spoke. "How long will this take?" As long as necessary, Santos replied, unmoved. Safety protocols can't be rushed. The statement was delivered with the finality of someone whose authority in this matter was absolute. As this exchange unfolded, Zora discreetly checked her glucose monitor again. The display illuminated her face with a soft blue glow as she read the numbers. The reading had increased further, the stress continuing to affect her levels. The small screen showed 178 mDL, well above her target range. She reached for her water bottle, taking a small sip as she tried to regulate her breathing, the cool liquid soothing her increasingly dry throat. Isaiah noticed his daughter's action and leaned closer. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of paternal concern beneath its calm exterior. "My levels are rising," she admitted in a whisper, angling the monitor so he could see the numbers. "Nothing dangerous yet, but I need to stay calm." The information was delivered with the clinical precision she had inherited from her mother, emotions secondary to data. Isaiah's expression hardened imperceptibly, the muscles around his jaw tightening. He straightened and addressed Santos. "My daughter's medical condition is being affected by this situation. We need to resolve it quickly." Though his voice remained controlled, the underlying message was clear. Further delay was not acceptable. Santos nodded, understanding the implication. "I understand. Let's move to the jetway where we can take statements without further delaying the other passengers." The suggestion was practical, a compromise that acknowledged both the severity of the situation and the needs of those not involved. Captain Turner agreed, relief evident in her posture. "That seems reasonable." She turned toward the cockpit, presumably to inform her first officer of the developing situation. As arrangements were being made, James approached Zora hesitantly. The scent of his inexpensive cologne, something citrusy and youthful, briefly cut through the tension. "Ms. Phillips," he said quietly, leaning down so his words wouldn't carry. "I want you to know that what happened wasn't right. I should have spoken up sooner." Zora offered him a small smile, the expression genuine, despite her physical discomfort. "Thank you for finding my supplies." James nodded, then lowered his voice further, glancing around to ensure Maria wasn't within earshot. "Just so you know, the in-flight service director is on her way. Amanda Foster. She's good people." The slight grammatical informality contrasted with his otherwise professional demeanor, suggesting sincerity. In the main cabin, passengers were growing restless. The delay was now approaching 45 minutes, and information was scarce. The ambient noise level had risen, papers rustling, conversations resuming, overhead bins being opened and closed as people retrieved items to pass the time. Rebecca Harlow sat rigidly in her economy seat, pointedly avoiding eye contact with anyone around her. Her posture remained perfect, despite the less spacious accommodation, her body language communicating continued defiance. Sophia Alvarez, who had been continuing to record, now approached Isaiah. Her camera was lowered, but still recording, the red light blinking steadily. "Mr. Phillips, would you be willing to provide a statement about what happened here today?" Her professional demeanor carried the polite persistence of an experienced journalist. Before Isaiah could respond, Santos intervened, placing himself subtly between them. "Ms. Alvarez, I recognize you from the tech conference last month. While I appreciate journalism right now, we need to follow security protocols without creating additional media pressure." The statement was diplomatic but firm. Sophia considered this, then nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I understand, but this story isn't going away." The observation wasn't a threat, but a simple statement of professional assessment, nor should it. Isaiah agreed, his tone suggesting this aligned with his own intentions. As they prepared to move to the jetway, Dr. Blackwell approached Zora. The scent of his aftershave, something old-fashioned with notes of sandalwood, briefly cut through the aircraft's recycled air. "Young lady," he said gently, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age. "You've handled this situation with remarkable grace. Your mother would be proud. Zora looked up, surprised by the unexpected reference. You knew my mother. The question emerged with uncharacteristic vulnerability, her carefully maintained composure momentarily cracking. Dr. Blackwell smiled, sadly deep lines appearing around his eyes. Dr. Zora Phillips was one of my most brilliant students. I recognized you immediately. You have her eyes and her strength. The observation was delivered with the warmth of genuine remembrance. Tears threatened to form in Zora's eyes for the first time since the ordeal began, but she blinked them away quickly, the momentary emotion contained with practiced control. Thank you, she said simply, the two words carrying more weight than an extended response. As they moved toward the exit, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What had begun as a seemingly routine seating dispute had revealed deeper issues that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. The soft hum of the aircraft systems continued unaffected by the human drama that had unfolded within its confines. In the economy section, a middle-aged white woman leaned across the aisle toward Rebecca. Her voice was low but carried clearly in the momentary lull of conversation. You should be ashamed, she said, the simple statement delivered without dramatic emphasis, but with unmistakable conviction. Rebecca stared straight ahead, her face a mask of defiance, but her hands trembled slightly as they gripped the armrests. The perfectly manicured nails dug into the fabric, creating small depressions that would remain long after she departed. On the jetway, they found Amanda Foster, the airline's customer service director, already waiting. Her tailored suit and pearl earrings spoke of corporate authority, but her expression was grave as she introduced herself. Mr. Phillips. Ms. Phillips, she said, extending her hand. I'm deeply troubled by what I'm hearing. This is not how international airlines treats our passengers. And yet Isaiah replied, shaking her hand firmly. It's exactly how my daughter was treated today. The observation wasn't delivered with anger, but with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an irrefutable truth. Amanda nodded, acknowledging the point with a slight wince. Yes. And I'm here to ensure this situation is addressed properly. Her professional smile couldn't quite mask the concern in her eyes, concern that seemed directed as much at the airline's reputation as at Zora's experience. Miguel Santos gestured toward a small conference room just off the jetway. The door was marked staff only in both English and French. Let's continue this conversation in private, he suggested, his tone making it clear this wasn't merely a preference, but a security protocol. As they walked, Zora checked her glucose monitor once more. The reading had stabilized, but remained elevated. She took a small insulin pen from her recovered medical kit and discreetly administered a dose, the motion practiced and efficient. The needle made a barely audible click as it retracted. The situation had reached a turning point. What happened next would depend on how the airline chose to respond, and whether they recognized the gravity of what had transpired. Behind them on the aircraft, passengers continued to share videos of the incident. Phones illuminated faces throughout the cabin as people reviewed footage, each screen a small window into what had just unfolded. Within minutes, the first clips would begin circulating on social media. By the time they reached the conference room, Seat 1A was already trending. The conference room just off the jetway was small, but well appointed, with a polished oak table and comfortable chairs. The walls were a neutral beige, decorated with framed aerial photographs of various international destinations served by the airline. The room smelled faintly of coffee and air freshener, corporate scents designed to be inoffensive. As Zora settled into a seat, she placed her medical kit on the table in front of her, a silent reminder of what had precipitated this meeting. The black case with its distinctive red medical symbol seemed to command attention, despite its small size, an artifact at the center of a much larger issue. Amanda Foster took a seat opposite the Phillips family, her expression professionally concerned. Her pearl necklace clicked softly against the table as she leaned forward. Miguel Santos remained standing near the door, his posture alert, but relaxed, while Captain Turner sat at the end of the table, her posture rigid. First and foremost, Amanda began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of corporate crisis management. I want to apologize for your experience today. This falls far short of our standards at international airlines. She placed her hands flat on the table, manicured nails perfectly aligned with the wood grain. Isaiah nodded slightly, but remained silent, waiting. His silence carried more weight than immediate response, a negotiation tactic he had perfected over decades of business dealings. I'd like to offer you both an upgrade to our premium first-class service for this flight, along with travel vouchers for future, Ms. Foster. Isaiah interrupted gently, his tone reasonable but firm. I don't think you understand the situation. This isn't about service recovery. It's about something much more fundamental. The overhead fluorescent lights reflected off his wedding ring as he gestured, the gold catching the light momentarily. Amanda's professional smile faltered slightly, revealing a flash of genuine concern beneath the corporate facade. Mr. Phillips, I assure you, we take discrimination very seriously at international airlines. The statement sounded rehearsed, a line from a training manual, rather than a personal conviction. Do you? Isaiah asked the simple question, delivered without heat, but with penetrating focus. Because what my daughter experienced today suggests otherwise. His fingers interlaced on the table before him, the gesture calm but deliberate. Zora placed a hand on her father's arm, the touch light but meaningful. Dad, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should hear what they're proposing. The scent of her vanilla shampoo briefly cut through the room's corporate neutrality as she leaned closer to him. Isaiah nodded, acknowledging his daughter's point, with a slight softening of his expression. You're right. Please continue, Ms. Foster. The words were polite, but his posture remained alert, evaluating rather than accepting. Amanda seemed relieved, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Thank you. As I was saying, we'd like to offer compensation for your inconvenience, and I assure you that the employees involved will receive additional training. She reached for a tablet in her briefcase, presumably to document the offer. Training. Isaiah repeated thoughtfully, tasting the word, as if considering its nutritional value. Tell me, Ms. Foster, what kind of training would prevent a flight attendant from believing a black teenager could legitimately be assigned to first class? The question was delivered conversationally, almost academically, but its implications were impossible to ignore. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The soft hum of the air conditioning system seemed suddenly loud in the silence that followed. A phone vibrated somewhere in Amanda's briefcase, the sound muffled but insistent. Captain Turner shifted uncomfortably, her uniform rustling slightly with the movement. Mr. Phillips, I want to be clear that International Airlines does not condone discrimination of any kind. Her tone suggested she believed in the statement despite evidence to the contrary. Yet it happened, Isaiah replied, his gaze steady, and would have continued happening if I hadn't intervened. The observation wasn't delivered as an accusation, but as a simple statement of fact. Miguel Santos, who had been observing quietly, now spoke up. He stepped forward, his security badge catching the light. For clarity, let's establish the sequence of events. He turned to Zora, his expression professional but kind. Ms. Phillips, could you walk us through what happened from your perspective? Zora straightened in her chair, gathering her thoughts. The soft leather creaked beneath her as she shifted position. I boarded the aircraft with a valid boarding pass for seat 1A. Ms. Harlow was sitting in my assigned seat and refused to move. The flight attendant, Ms. Rodriguez, suggested I take a seat in economy, despite verification that 1A was assigned to me. Her voice remained steady, clinical in its precision. When I refused, she began questioning my medical condition, which is documented in your system. During this process, someone removed my medical supplies from my backpack without my consent. Santos nodded, making notes on a small pad. His pen scratched softly against the paper, the sound strangely analog in the digital age. And at any point, did anyone check Ms. Harlow's boarding pass with the same scrutiny applied to yours? The question was pointed, but delivered without leading. No, Zora replied. In fact, when it was confirmed that her seat was in economy, she was still permitted to remain in first class temporarily while I was asked to move. Her observation highlighted the double standard with surgical precision. Amanda Foster looked increasingly uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. Her carefully constructed professional facade was developing cracks. There seems to have been a serious lapse in judgment by our crew members. The admission was reluctant, but unavoidable given the evidence. A lapse in judgment. Isaiah repeated his tone, making it clear he considered this a significant understatement. The phrase hung in the air, its inadequacy evident to everyone in the room. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. James Whitman entered looking nervous but determined. His uniform appeared slightly rumpled now, the pristine appearance from earlier, showing signs of a stressful day. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I thought you should know that videos of the incident are already online. Our social media team is reporting significant negative attention." Amanda's professional composure slipped momentarily, a flash of alarm crossing her features before she regained control. How significant? The question emerged more sharply than she likely intended. James hesitated, glancing briefly at the Phillips family before answering. The hashtag #Seat1A is trending nationally. Several celebrities have retweeted the videos. He swallowed visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing. Viewership is already over 1 million and climbing rapidly. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. What had been a contained incident was now a public relations crisis expanding beyond the conference room walls with every passing minute. The soft background hum of the air conditioning seemed to take on a more ominous tone, like distant thunder approaching. Amanda turned back to the Phillips family, reassessing the situation, with new calculations clearly visible in her expression. Her approach shifted visibly from damage control to crisis management. "Mr. Phillips, I understand your concerns more clearly now. Perhaps we should discuss a more comprehensive response." The change in tone was subtle, but unmistakable, a new deference born not from respect, but necessity. Isaiah smiled slightly, not with humor, but with recognition. The power dynamics had shifted. Now that the public was watching, the airline was suddenly more invested in finding a real solution. It was a pattern he had seen countless times throughout his career, principles following publicity. "I'm listening," he said simply, the two words carrying more weight than an extended response. The scent of his subtle cologne, sandalwood and vanilla, Amara's favorite on him, briefly intensified as he leaned forward slightly. Before Amanda could respond, another knock came at the door. This time, a young Hispanic man in a crisp suit entered, his expression grave. His tie was slightly askew, suggesting he had moved quickly to reach them. "Ms. Foster," he said, slightly breathless. "Gerald Matthews is on the line. He's requesting to speak with Mr. Phillips immediately." A flicker of surprise crossed Amanda's face. Gerald Matthews was the CEO of International Airlines, a man who rarely involved himself directly in passenger incidents. The corporate hierarchy had just been bypassed entirely, a recognition of the situation's severity. "Of course," she replied, gesturing to the phone on the conference table. The movement was slightly jerky, betraying her surprise. "Mr. Phillips, our CEO, would like to speak with you." Isaiah nodded, unsurprised. He had known Gerald for years through various business forums and industry conferences, though they weren't close friends. The relationship was one of mutual professional respect rather than personal connection. As Amanda set up the call, Captain Turner leaned toward Miguel Santos. Her voice was low but audible in the small room. "How much longer will this take? I have 178 passengers waiting." Irritation edged her tone, though it was unclear whether directed at the situation or the delay. "As long as necessary," Santos replied firmly, his stance widening slightly. "This is now both a security issue and a potential civil rights matter." The classification elevated the incident beyond a customer service problem, placing it firmly in regulatory territory. The speakerphone crackled to life, the sound quality poor, but the voice unmistakable. Isaiah came. Gerald Matthews' voice tense and concerned. "What the hell is happening on my aircraft?" The corporate Polish had been stripped away, revealing genuine alarm. "Hello, Gerald," Isaiah replied calmly, his voice carrying easily across the table. "I was just discussing with your team how my daughter was denied her assigned seat, had her medical condition questioned, and then had her life-saving medication tampered with, all while flying on your airline." The summary was delivered without dramatic emphasis, the facts allowed to stand on their own. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the soft, electronic hum of the speakerphone. The tension in the room was palpable, like a stretched wire about to snap. "I've seen the videos," Matthews finally said, his tone suggesting he wished he hadn't. "They're troubling." The understatement hung awkwardly in the air. "That's one word for it." Isaiah agreed, the mild response carrying more weight than an angry outburst. "Tell me what you need to make this right," Matthews said, cutting to the chase with the directness of someone accustomed to solving problems quickly. The question was an acknowledgement that the situation had moved beyond standard remedies. Isaiah considered the question carefully, glancing at Zora, who nodded encouragingly. Her confidence in him was evident, a silent communication, honed over years of shared challenges. "This isn't about compensation, Gerald. It's about acknowledging a pattern and committing to meaningful change." "I'm listening," Matthews replied, echoing Isaiah's earlier words. The mirroring wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Isaiah glanced at Zora, who nodded encouragingly. "First, this flight needs new crew leadership. The current lead flight attendant has demonstrated bias that cannot be addressed with a simple apology." The request was firm but specific, targeting the issue, rather than seeking punitive measures for their own sake. Amanda Foster looked alarmed, her professional composure finally cracking completely. "Replacing crew mid-journey is highly unusual," she began. But Isaiah cut her off with a raised hand. "So is tampering with a diabetic teenager's insulin." He countered the comparison, silencing her immediately. The statement landed with quiet force, highlighting the extraordinary nature of what had transpired. Matthew's voice came through the speaker again, his decision swift and unequivocal. "Amanda, make the necessary arrangements." "What else, Isaiah?" The corporate executive had recognized the severity of the situation and was moving directly to resolution, bypassing the usual layers of bureaucracy. "Second, I want James Whitman promoted to lead a new passenger dignity initiative. He was the only crew member who attempted to follow proper procedures." Isaiah nodded toward James, who stood straighter at the mention of his name. James looked startled at being mentioned, color rising to his cheeks. "Sir, he began, clearly unprepared for this development. "You did the right thing when it wasn't easy," Isaiah told him, his tone carrying genuine approval. "That's exactly the kind of leadership this airline needs." The observation wasn't flattery, but recognition of a quality essential for institutional change. Matthews didn't hesitate. "Done. James, consider yourself appointed. We'll discuss details later." The quick agreement suggested he recognized both the public relations value and the practical merit of the suggestion. The junior flight attendant stood straighter, a mix of surprise and determination, replacing his previous nervousness. His posture changed subtly but significantly, shoulders back, chin raised slightly, the physical manifestation of new responsibility. Third, Isaiah continued, his tone remaining measured and reasonable. "I want a full external audit of international airlines training procedures with a focus on identifying and eliminating bias in passenger interactions." This request moved beyond the individual incident to address underlying structural issues. This request was met with silence, as Matthews considered the implications. Such an audit would be costly, potentially embarrassing, and would set a precedent for the industry. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the gap in conversation, the mechanical sound underscoring the human tension. "That's significant," Matthews finally said, choosing his words carefully. The hesitation suggested calculations being made financial, legal, reputational. So is what happened to my daughter. Isaiah replied, the simple comparison impossible to refute. His tone remained reasonable, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Before Matthews could respond, Zora spoke up. If I may. She said, her voice clear and confident, despite the adults surrounding her. The sound of her chair creaking as she leaned forward seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. I'd like to add something. Of course, Matthews replied, sounding slightly surprised to hear her voice. The electronic distortion of the speakerphone couldn't mask his change in tone, a shift from corporate negotiation to something more personal. I believe the issue goes beyond training. Zora said, her words carefully chosen. It's about accountability. What happened today wasn't just one person's mistake. It was enabled by a culture that allowed it to happen. Her analysis cut to the heart of the matter, identifying the systemic nature of the problem, rather than focusing solely on individual actions. The room fell silent, all eyes on the teenager, who spoke with the wisdom and insight of someone far beyond her years. The soft whoosh of the air conditioning vents seemed to emphasize the silence rather than fill it. What do you propose? Matthews asked, his tone suggesting genuine interest rather than mere appeasement. I'd like to help design a passenger advocacy program, Zora replied without hesitation. One that gives travelers a direct channel to report incidents without fear of dismissal or retaliation. Her fingers absently traced the medical alert symbol on her insulin case, as she spoke, the tactile connection to her vulnerability informing her solution. Isaiah looked at his daughter with pride, the emotion visible despite his usual reserve. Even after everything she'd experienced, her focus was on creating solutions that would help others. In that moment, she was so like Amara that it made his chest ache with both pride and loss. Ambitious, Matthews commented after a brief pause, but reasonable. We'll need to work out the details, but in principle I agree. The capitulation wasn't grudging, but seemed to carry genuine recognition of the proposal's merit. The atmosphere in the room had transformed. What had begun as damage control was evolving into something more meaningful. A commitment to structural change that might actually address the underlying issues, rather than merely applying a corporate bandage. Miguel Santos, who had been quietly observing, now stepped forward. The leather of his security holster creaked slightly with the movement. There's still the matter of Ms. Harlow. He reminded them, his expression serious. Tampering with medical supplies could potentially be a criminal offense. Captain Turner looked alarmed, her professional composure finally cracking. Are we talking about involving the police now? That would delay us even further. She glanced at her watch pointedly, the gesture communicating her growing impatience. Isaiah exchanged a glance with Zora, who subtly shook her head. The silent communication between them was seamless, a shared understanding that transcended words. I don't believe pressing charges is necessary, Isaiah said, his decision informed by his daughter's preference. But Ms. Harlow should not be permitted to continue on this flight. Her actions demonstrated a disturbing disregard for my daughter's safety. Matthews didn't hesitate. Amanda, please arrange for Ms. Harlow to be rebooked on a later flight. The directive was delivered with the finality of executive decision-making brooking no argument. Yes, sir, Amanda replied, already reaching for her phone. The device chirped softly as she unlocked it, preparing to implement the decision. As these decisions were being implemented, Zora discreetly checked her glucose monitor again. The small device illuminated her face with a soft blue glow as she reviewed the readings. The numbers had begun to normalize, the immediate danger passing. Her body was responding to the insulin she had administered earlier, the medical crisis, at least temporarily averted. Isaiah noticed his paternal awareness catching the subtle movement. Are you okay? He asked quietly, the question carrying layers of meaning beyond the simple words. Zora nodded, a small smile softening her expression. Better now, she replied. The simple statement acknowledged both her physical improvement and the resolution taking shape around them. Outside the conference room, the situation on the aircraft was evolving rapidly. Passengers were growing increasingly restless. Social media was ablaze with commentary and speculation, and Rebecca Harlow remained oblivious to the fact that she was about to be removed from the flight. The power had shifted. What happened next would set a precedent not just for international airlines, but for the industry as a whole. The incident that began with a disputed seat had catalyzed a conversation about dignity, respect, and accountability that would extend far beyond Flight 847. When they returned to the aircraft, the atmosphere had changed perceptibly. The recycled air seemed charged with anticipation. Conversations hushed as they entered. Passengers who had been merely curious before now watched with knowing eyes as Zora and Isaiah made their way back to first class. Word had spread not just about the confrontation, but about who Isaiah Phillips was and what his intervention meant. Amanda Foster led the way, her professional demeanor firmly back in place despite the extraordinary circumstances. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, the sound amplified in the unusually quiet cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced as they boarded, "we apologize for the delay. We'll be resuming boarding procedures momentarily." Her voice carried the practiced cadence of customer service, though a slight tremor betrayed the stress beneath. In the first-class cabin, Maria Rodriguez was nowhere to be seen. Her absence was conspicuous, creating a subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. In her place stood a tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair, her uniform crisp and her smile genuine as she greeted the returning passengers. The scent of her perfume, something subtle with notes of jasmine, briefly cut through the airplane's recycled air. "Ms. Phillips." "Mr. Phillips," she said warmly, extending her hand. The gesture was smooth and confident, without the nervous energy that had characterized Maria's interactions. "I'm Catherine Winters, Senior Cabin Director. I'll be leading your flight to Paris today." Her voice carried the melodious cadence of the Caribbean, soft but authoritative. Isaiah nodded in acknowledgement, noting the swift implementation of the agreed changes. The silver cufflinks at his wrists caught the light as he shook her hand briefly. Gerald Matthews might have his faults, but inefficiency wasn't among them. As Zora settled back into seat 1A, she noticed her backpack had been returned to its original position and a fresh bottle of water awaited her. The leather seat felt cool against her back as she sank into it, finally allowing herself to relax slightly. Small gestures but significant ones that acknowledged the gravity of what had occurred. Dr. Blackwell, who had remained in his seat during the Jetway conference, leaned across the aisle. His book lay closed in his lap, a finger marking his place. "Everything all right?" he asked kindly, his academic diction softened by genuine concern. Zora smiled, the expression reaching her eyes for the first time since boarding. "Getting there," she replied. The simple response acknowledged both progress and ongoing process. Meanwhile, in the economy section, Amanda Foster approached Rebecca Harlow, who was still fuming in seat 12B. The investment banker's perfect posture had given way to a slight slump, though she straightened immediately upon noticing Amanda. Their conversation was brief and one-sided, Amanda's professional but firm tone carrying clearly despite her lowered voice. "Ms. Harlow, I regret to inform you that you'll need to deplane. We've rebooked you on tomorrow's flight." The statement was delivered as a fait accompli rather than a negotiable point. Rebecca's face contorted with shock and outrage. "What? You can't be serious. On what grounds?" Her voice rose sharply, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "Interfering with another passenger's medical equipment constitutes a safety violation," Amanda explained calmly, though her posture had tensed slightly. "This decision comes directly from our CEO." Within moments, Rebecca was gathering her belongings, her movements sharp and agitated. The soft rustle of fabric and click of her compact mirror being snapped shut punctuated her muttered protests. As she passed the first-class cabin on her way out, Rebecca locked eyes with Zora briefly. There was no apology in her gaze, only simmering resentment, and perhaps buried deep beneath it, a flicker of shame that she quickly masked with a lifted chin. The encounter lasted only seconds, but the energy between them was palpable. The entitled passenger forced to face consequences, the young woman whose dignity had been challenged, now vindicated not through anger, but through justice. Once Rebecca had been removed, Captain Turner's voice came over the intercom, the slight static of the PA system preceding her words. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly. The expected flight time to Paris remains 7 hours and 40 minutes. Her tone was professional, but warmer than before, suggesting the resolution had affected her as well. There was a collective sigh of relief from the passengers, many of whom had been witnesses to the entire ordeal. Some had even participated in spreading the videos that now dominated social media. The cabin hummed with low conversations, the collective processing of what they had witnessed. Sophia Alvarez, who had been updated about the conference room decisions, approached Zora's seat with her notebook in hand. Her camera was now lowered, but still present, a professional tool rather than a weapon. "Ms. Phillips," she said, "would you be willing to provide a statement for my article? I think your perspective is important." Zora glanced at her father, who gave a subtle nod of encouragement. The overhead light caught in his close-cropped hair, highlighting the silver at his temples, a recent development accelerated by the stress of single parenthood. "Yes," she agreed, "but after takeoff, if that's all right. I need to check my glucose levels again before we depart." The medical monitor at her wrist had vibrated again, a gentle reminder of her physical reality amid the social drama. Sophia nodded understandingly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course. Thank you." She moved back to her seat, her movements deliberate and unobtrusive. As the final preparations for departure continued, James Whitman appeared beside Isaiah's seat. The junior flight attendant, now suddenly promoted to a leadership position, looked both nervous and determined. His uniform had been straightened, his posture more confident than before. "Mr. Phillips," he said quietly, leaning down slightly to avoid being overheard. "I wanted to thank you for your confidence in me. I promise I won't let you down." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, free from the corporate platitudes that often characterized such interactions. Isaiah regarded him thoughtfully, taking the measure of the young man before responding. The pause wasn't dramatic, but evaluative. "What made you speak up earlier when your colleague was pressuring my daughter?" James hesitated, considering the question carefully. His gaze dropped briefly before meeting Isaiah's eyes again. "It wasn't right," he said, simply, the words unadorned but powerful in their clarity. And remaining silent felt like being complicit. His fingers fidgeted slightly with his cuffs as he spoke, but his voice remained steady. Isaiah nodded, satisfied with the answer. It revealed character rather than calculation, principle rather than performance. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this initiative. It's not about grand gestures. It's about doing the right thing in small moments." As James moved away to assist with final preparations, Captain Turner emerged from the cockpit once more. Her uniform jacket had been freshly adjusted, the gold stripes on her sleeves catching the light as she approached Zora directly. The click of her low-heeled shoes against the floor created a rhythm that commanded attention without demanding it. "Ms. Phillips," she said formally, "on behalf of the flight crew, I want to apologize for your experience today. It was unacceptable, and I take responsibility for not intervening sooner." The admission wasn't required by protocol, but seemed to emerge from personal conviction. Zora looked up at the captain, noting the genuine regret in her eyes. The overhead reading light cast soft shadows across both their faces, creating an intimacy in the otherwise public space. "Thank you, Captain Turner. I appreciate that." Turner nodded, then lowered her voice slightly, leaning in so her words wouldn't carry beyond their immediate vicinity. "Your father is making some important changes happen today. Changes that are long overdue." The observation carried a weight of experience behind it, suggesting she had witnessed similar situations throughout her career. With that, she returned to the cockpit, leaving Zora to consider her words. The pneumatic hiss of the cockpit door closing punctuated the moment like auditory punctuation. Outside the aircraft, Amanda Foster was dealing with a furious Rebecca Harlow, who was threatening lawsuits and professional consequences. The two women stood near the gate desk, Rebecca's voice occasionally rising above the ambient terminal noise, while Amanda maintained a composed exterior despite the verbal onslaught. "Ms. Harlow," she explained patiently, "the decision is final. Your behavior today violated multiple airline policies, including interfering with another passenger's medical equipment. You've been rebooked on tomorrow's flight, and we'll provide hotel accommodation." Her tone was reasonable but firm, a brick wall disguised as silk. "This is outrageous," Rebecca sputtered, her carefully applied makeup now slightly smudged from the stress of the confrontation. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The question emerged again, her default response when challenged. "Yes," Amanda replied evenly, maintaining steady eye contact. "You're a passenger who has been removed from this flight for violating safety protocols. Your company's travel department has been notified as per standard procedure." The last detail was delivered without emphasis, but landed with visible impact. Rebecca's face paled at this detail, the color draining from her cheeks in a visible wave. The realization that her professional reputation might be affected seemed to finally penetrate her indignation. Her posture changed subtly, shoulders dropping, spine less rigid as the implications sank in. Back on the aircraft, preparations for departure were nearly complete. The new cabin crew moved efficiently through the pre-flight checks, their professionalism a stark contrast to the earlier chaos. Seatbelts clicked into place, overhead bins were secured with decisive thuds, and the ambient noise level settled into the normal pre-departure hum. Catherine Winters approached Zora again, her movements smooth and unhurried. "Ms. Phillips, is there anything specific you need during the flight to help manage your condition?" The question was asked quietly with genuine concern, rather than performative customer service. Zora was momentarily taken aback by the considerate question. After the earlier scrutiny and skepticism, the simple acknowledgement of her needs without questioning their validity felt like a revelation. "Just regular meal service," she replied, "and perhaps some extra water throughout the flight." She gestured to the bottle already provided, which she had partially consumed. Catherine nodded. "Of course. And please don't hesitate to let us know if you need anything else." She moved on to continue her preparations, leaving Zora with the novel sensation of being treated as a valued passenger rather than an inconvenience. As the door was finally closed and the aircraft began pushing back from the gate, Isaiah received a text message from Gerald Matthews. "External audit team already being assembled. Board has approved emergency measures. This won't happen again on my airline." The screen illuminated his face briefly as he read the message, casting blue-white light across his features. Isaiah showed the message to Zora, who nodded thoughtfully. "It's a start," she said, her assessment measured rather than enthusiastic. The promise of action was encouraging, but she had learned early that implementation was where real change happened or failed to. Dr. Blackwell, who had been observing quietly, leaned across the aisle again. The leather of his seat creaked slightly with the movement. "You know," he said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to lecture halls, "your mother once told me that real change doesn't come from grand announcements. It comes from moments of clarity that can't be ignored." Zora smiled at the mention of her mother, a mixture of sadness and warmth crossing her features. She was right. The simple agreement carried layers of meaning, acknowledgement of both wisdom and loss. "She usually was," Dr. Blackwell agreed, with a warm chuckle settling back into his seat. The soft rustle of pages resumed as he returned to his book, though his awareness of his surroundings remained evident in his occasional glances. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, the social media storm continued to intensify beyond the metal tube that contained them. Lucas Rivera, International Airlines' social media manager, was working frantically to craft an official response. The early drafts had been rejected as too defensive or too vague. Finally, with Matthews's direct approval, a simple statement was released, International Airlines acknowledges that a passenger was subjected to discriminatory treatment on Flight 847 today. We are taking immediate action, including personnel changes and a comprehensive review of our policies. We have directly apologized to the affected passenger and her family and are committed to ensuring this never happens again. The statement was notable, not just for what it said, but for what it didn't say. There were no excuses, no attempt to minimize what had happened or deflect responsibility. It was a straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a commitment to change, rare in corporate communications, and therefore all the more powerful. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air, Zora gazed out the window at the receding ground below. The city grew smaller, with each passing second buildings and roads transforming into a miniature model of human construction. The events of the past 2 hours felt surreal now, a whirlwind of confrontation, validation, and transformation. She checked her glucose monitor one more time. The small screen displayed numbers that had finally returned to normal range, the immediate physical stress of the situation passing. Her body was regulating itself again, finding equilibrium after the disruption. Isaiah noticed her checking the device. "All good?" he asked quietly, his voice nearly lost in the engine noise that accompanied takeoff. Zora nodded. "All good," she confirmed, the double meaning clear between them. The physical danger had passed, and a path toward resolution had been established. But they both knew that what had happened today was far from over. It had merely shifted from a personal confrontation to something larger, a public reckoning with patterns of behavior that had gone unchallenged for too long. The incident would continue to unfold in boardrooms and social media feeds, in policy documents and training programs. As the aircraft climbed to cruising altitude, leaving the airport far below, the story of Seat 1A was just beginning to spread across the world. What had started as a simple request for a rightful seat had become a catalyst for change that would extend far beyond one flight or one airline. The revelation wasn't just that bias existed. They had both known that long before today. The revelation was that when confronted directly and documented undeniably, even entrenched systems could be forced to acknowledge their failings and commit to improvement. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a significant step. And for now, that was enough. The sky outside the aircraft windows had transformed from deep black to a soft gradient of purples and oranges as Flight 847 began its descent toward Charles de Gaulle Airport. The first hints of dawn illuminated the cloud layer below, transforming it from an ominous void to a gently undulating sea of pink-tinged cotton. Paris awaited below the city of light, just beginning to stir in the early morning hours. In the first-class cabin, Zora Phillips was fully awake now, reviewing her presentation for the Global Tech Summit on her tablet. The screen's soft glow illuminated her face, highlighting her focused expression. Despite the eventful flight, her focus on the purpose of their journey had returned. NeuraSense represented years of work, a tangible way to help children who struggled to communicate their emotions. The responsibility of representing that work properly had reasserted itself as their destination approached. She scrolled through the presentation, making small adjustments to the wording of complex slides. The soft clicks of the virtual keyboard provided a quiet counterpoint to the changing engine sounds as the aircraft began its gradual descent. The cabin lights had brightened slightly, signaling the transition from night to morning service. Isaiah watched his daughter with pride as she made small adjustments to her slides, adding notes about user testing results and refining her explanation of the neural interface technology. The way she chewed her lower lip when concentrating was pure Amara, a genetic inheritance more powerful than any conscious mimicry could create. Even after everything that had happened, her commitment to her work remained unwavering. 5 minutes to landing, Catherine Winters announced as she moved through the cabin, ensuring all passengers were prepared for arrival. Her voice carried the perfect blend of authority and warmth. "Please stow all electronic devices and ensure your seatbelts are fastened." As Zora put away her tablet, reluctantly pausing her final review, James Whitman approached their seats. His uniform was fresh, he had changed during the flight, and his posture carried a new confidence that hadn't been present during boarding. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. "Ms. Phillips," he said, his voice carrying genuine respect. "I wanted to thank you before we land. What happened yesterday, it changed things for me. Made me realize that staying silent isn't being neutral, it's being complicit." The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the sincerity in his expression. Zora looked up at him, surprised by his candor. The faint scent of coffee from the galley mixed with the clean smell of his freshly pressed uniform as he stood beside her seat. "You spoke up when it mattered," she replied. "That's what counts." James nodded thoughtfully, absently adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit that betrayed his continuing adjustment to his new role. "I've been working on preliminary ideas for the Passenger Dignity Initiative. I'd value your input if you're willing." His voice carried a blend of professional confidence and personal humility that hadn't been present during their first encounter. "I'd like that," Zora agreed, her posture straightening slightly with interest. "I'll email you the draft framework later today," James promised before moving on to assist with landing preparations. His steps were more purposeful now, each movement carrying the weight of new responsibility. As the aircraft made its final approach, the runway lights visible as glowing beacons through the morning mist, Isaiah received a message on his phone from Gerald Matthews. "Press conference complete. Announced comprehensive review of policies, external audit, and new passenger advocacy program. FAA involvement acknowledged. Media response cautiously positive." The screen's brightness seemed harsh in the soft dawn light filtering through the cabin windows. He showed the message to Zora, who nodded approvingly. The aircraft banked gently, offering a breathtaking view of Paris awakening below. "He's saying the right things," she observed, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "The question is whether they'll follow through." "That's where we come in," Isaiah replied, his voice carrying quiet determination. "To ensure they do." The subtle pressure of the aircraft descending pushed them gently back into their seats. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the runway, the gentle squeal of tires meeting tarmac signaling their arrival. As the plane taxied toward the terminal, passengers prepared to disembark, the cabin filling with the sounds of seatbelts unclicking and overhead compartments being opened. As promised, Catherine approached once they had reached the gate. "Captain Turner would like to speak with you now, if that's convenient," she said. Zora and Isaiah followed her to the cockpit, where Captain Turner was completing her post-flight checks. The small space was filled with the soft glow of instrument panels, creating an almost intimate atmosphere. The captain stood as they entered, removing her hat in a gesture of respect that seemed both formal and genuinely heartfelt. "Ms. Phillips," she said, extending her hand. The morning light streaming through the cockpit windows highlighted the silver strands in her hair. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wanted to apologize personally for what happened on my aircraft. As captain, I'm responsible for the safety and dignity of every passenger, and yesterday I failed in that responsibility." Zora shook the offered hand, noting the captain's firm grip and direct gaze. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your honesty. I've been flying for 27 years. Turner continued, lines of experience evident around her eyes as she spoke. "And I've seen a lot of changes in this industry. But some things haven't changed enough. What happened to you shouldn't have been possible in 2025. Her admission carried the weight of professional reflection rather than mere corporate damage control. Yet it was Isaiah noted quietly, his tone factual rather than accusatory. Turner nodded, acknowledging the point with a slight wince. "Yes. And that's something we need to address honestly, not just with policy changes, but with a fundamental shift in our culture." The leather of her captain's chair creaked softly as she shifted her weight. She turned back to Zora. "I understand you're developing a communication device for children with autism." Zora looked surprised that the captain knew this detail. "Yes, NeuraSense. It translates micro-expressions and physiological signals into emotional data." Her passion for the project briefly overcame her fatigue bringing animation to her voice. "My nephew is on the spectrum." Turner explained, her professional demeanor softening. "He's brilliant, but he struggles to express how he's feeling, especially in overwhelming environments. Something like your device could change his life." The personal connection added depth to what might otherwise have seemed like polite conversation. "That's the goal," Zora replied, warming to the subject. "To give a voice to those who struggle to be heard." The metal floor of the cockpit reflected the morning light as she spoke, creating a subtle golden glow around them. The parallel to her own experience hung unspoken in the air between them. Turner seemed to recognize the connection. "Well," she said with a smile that reached her eyes, "I look forward to hearing about your success at the summit. And I want you to know that I'll be personally involved in implementing the changes at international airlines. This isn't just about avoiding bad publicity, it's about doing what's right." As they exited the aircraft, they found a small group waiting at the gate: airline representatives, airport officials, and a distinguished-looking woman in a crisp suit who stepped forward to introduce herself. The terminal bustled with early morning activity around them, creating a backdrop of white noise. "Mr. Phillips." "Ms. Phillips," she said in accented English. "I'm Director Leclerc of Charles de Gaulle Airport. We've been made aware of the situation on your flight, and I wanted to personally ensure your experience in Paris is positive from this point forward." Her perfume, something subtle and expensive, briefly mingled with the antiseptic scent of the terminal. Isaiah shook her hand. "Thank you, Director. That's very considerate. We've arranged expedited processing through immigration and customs," she continued, "and your transportation to the hotel is waiting." As they were escorted through the terminal, Zora noticed the subtle but unmistakable transformation in how they were being treated. The incident had created a ripple effect, causing everyone in their orbit to examine their own behaviors and assumptions. Each interaction now carried a new awareness, a heightened consciousness that transformed routine courtesy into something more deliberate and thoughtful. After clearing immigration with unprecedented speed, they were led to a waiting luxury sedan. As they settled into the comfortable leather seats, Zora turned to her father. The car's interior smelled of polished leather and subtle air freshener. "It's strange," she said quietly as the driver closed their door. "Yesterday I had to fight just to keep my assigned seat. Today everyone's falling over themselves to help us." Isaiah nodded thoughtfully, watching the airport recede through the tinted window. "That's often how change works. It takes a moment of undeniable clarity, a spotlight on something that was always there, but easily ignored, to catalyze transformation." "But is it real change?" Zora pressed absently, tracing patterns on the leather armrest. "Or just special treatment for us because of who you are?" That Isaiah replied. His eyes meeting hers will depend on what happens next, on whether the policies and practices change for everyone, not just for those with influence or visibility. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, creating shifting patterns across their faces as the car navigated through traffic. As their car moved through the streets of Paris, Zora's phone chimed with an incoming email. The familiar notification sound seemed to bridge their journey from conflict to resolution. It was from James Whitman, already delivering on his promise to share the draft framework for the Passenger Dignity Initiative. Zora opened the document, scanning its contents with interest. James had outlined a comprehensive approach, including mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, clear escalation procedures for passenger complaints, and most significantly, an independent review board to monitor compliance. The blue light from her screen illuminated her face as she read in the dim interior of the car. "He's serious about this," Zora observed, showing the document to her father. The document was detailed and thoughtful, suggesting hours of work during the overnight flight. Isaiah reviewed it with approval. "Yes, he is. And so is Gerald, it seems. This framework has executive support written all over it." His practiced eye recognized the corporate language that indicated high-level backing. The grand ballroom of the International Conference Center was filled to capacity, the low hum of anticipation vibrating through the air. Hundreds of technology leaders, medical professionals, and investors had gathered for the most anticipated presentation of the Global Tech Summit, the unveiling of NeuraSense by its 17-year-old creator, Zora Phillips. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled crowd, reflecting off polished surfaces and creating an atmosphere of expectation. The scent of coffee and subtle perfumes mingled in the air, creating the distinctive olfactory signature of high-level professional gatherings. But the buzz in the room wasn't just about the revolutionary technology. Many attendees had seen the videos and read the articles about what had transpired on Flight 847. Some had come out of curiosity about the teenager who had stood her ground against discrimination and emerged victorious. Others were there to evaluate whether Phillips Innovation's reputation for ethical leadership extended to its founder's daughter. All were about to be impressed on both counts. Zora stood backstage reviewing her notes one final time. The muffled sounds of the audience filtered through the heavy curtain, creating a soft backdrop to her focused preparation. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her braids pulled back in a neat bun. The NeuraSense prototype adorned her wrist, its sleek design belying the complex technology within. Isaiah approached, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. The familiar weight was grounding a physical anchor in the sea of anticipation. "Ready?" he asked simply. Zora took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she centered herself. She nodded. "Ready. Remember," he said gently, his voice carrying years of paternal wisdom. "They're here to see your work, not to hear about yesterday's incident." "I know," Zora replied with a small smile. "NeuraSense is what matters today." She squared her shoulders, the motion conveying determination and focus. As they waited for the introduction to conclude, James Whitman approached them, looking somewhat out of place in the high-tech gathering. His airline uniform had been replaced by a conservative suit, but his posture still carried the attentive readiness of someone accustomed to service roles. "Ms. Phillips," he said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to wish you luck, and to let you know that the Passenger Dignity Initiative has been officially approved by the board. We're moving forward immediately." His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct, subtle indicators of his evolving confidence. Zora smiled, genuine warmth reaching her eyes. "That's wonderful news, James. Thank you for letting me know. Your feedback on the framework was invaluable." He added his professional tone, softening slightly. "Especially your suggestion about anonymous reporting channels for crew members who witness problematic behavior." The recognition was sincere rather than perfunctory. Before they could continue the conversation, the summit moderator's voice filled the ballroom, amplified by the sophisticated sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce one of the most promising young innovators in medical technology. At just 17, she has developed a device that could revolutionize communication for children with autism spectrum disorders. Please join me in welcoming Zora Phillips." The applause was thunderous as Zora walked onto the stage, her posture straight and her expression composed. The spotlights were warm against her skin as she took her position at the podium, waiting for the applause to subside before beginning. The microphone stood ready, its presence both intimidating and empowering. "Thank you," she said, her clear voice carrying through the ballroom. The acoustics were perfect, amplifying her words without distortion. 3 years ago, I met a child named Marcus during a volunteer program at a local hospital. Marcus is brilliant. He can solve complex mathematical equations in his head and remember entire books after reading them once. But he cannot tell you when he's feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or in pain. The audience was silent, captivated by her confident delivery and the personal connection she established. Hundreds of eyes focused on her, but rather than feeling intimidated, she drew strength from their attention. Marcus has nonverbal autism. His inability to communicate his emotions often leads to meltdowns that are distressing for him and those around him. Traditional communication methods have limited success because they rely on Marcus initiating the interaction. Zora raised her wrist, displaying the sleek device that looked like an ordinary smartwatch. The lights caught its polished surface, sending a brief flash across the audience. NeuraSense takes a different approach. Instead of waiting for Marcus to tell us how he feels, something he struggles to do, it reads the subtle physiological signals his body naturally produces. She activated a large screen behind her, which displayed a simplified diagram of the device's functionality. The graphics were clean and professional, making complex technology accessible without oversimplification. Micro-expressions, heart rate variability, skin conductance, and subtle muscle movements are processed through our proprietary algorithm to identify emotional states with 94% accuracy. The technical portion of her presentation was flawless. Zora explained complex neurological concepts with remarkable clarity, making them accessible without oversimplification. She presented case studies, data visualizations, and video testimonials from families who had participated in the pilot program. Each element was presented with scientific precision, yet the human impact remained central throughout. But it was when she invited a special guest onto the stage that the full impact of her work became clear. "I'd like to introduce you to someone very important," Zora said with a warm smile. "Marcus is here with us today, along with his mother, Dr. Elena Vasquez." A boy of about 10 walked onto the stage, accompanied by a woman in her 30s. The audience's applause softened out of consideration for the child, creating a gentle wave of sound rather than overwhelming noise. Marcus wore a NeuraSense device on his wrist, slightly larger than Zora's prototype, to accommodate his smaller size. "Marcus has been using NeuraSense for 6 months now," Zora explained, her tone shifting to include him in the conversation rather than talking about him. "Dr. Vasquez has agreed to share their experience with us today." Elena stepped to the microphone. Before NeuraSense, she began, her voice thick with emotion that she managed with professional control. "We had no warning before Marcus's meltdowns. We couldn't tell if he was in pain, overwhelmed by sensory input, or simply tired. Now the device alerts us when his stress levels are rising and identifies the most likely cause based on contextual factors and his individual patterns." She turned towards Zora with unmistakable gratitude, the spotlights catching the moisture in her eyes. But the most remarkable moment came 3 months ago when Marcus spoke his first full sentence. After learning to associate the emotional labels from NeuraSense with his internal states, he suddenly had the vocabulary to express what he was feeling. The audience was completely silent, many visibly moved by the testimony. A few discreetly wiped tears, the human impact of the technology resonating beyond its technical specifications. Marcus, who had been standing quietly beside his mother, suddenly spoke. "I like your invention," he said to Zora, his delivery somewhat flat, but his words clear. "It helps me tell people when things are too loud or too bright." His hand moved to adjust the device on his wrist, the gesture unconscious but telling. The simplicity and sincerity of his statement brought tears to many eyes in the audience. Zora knelt down to Marcus's level, the microphone picking up her response despite the change in position. "Thank you, Marcus," she said warmly. "Your feedback has been very important in making NeuraSense better." As Marcus and his mother left the stage to resounding applause, Zora concluded her presentation with a vision for the future. NeuraSense is just the beginning. We're already developing applications for other conditions where emotional communication is challenging: post-traumatic stress disorder, severe anxiety disorders, and even dementia. She paused, looking out at the audience with quiet confidence. The spotlights were warm against her skin, but she no longer felt their heat as something to be endured. Everyone deserves to be heard and understood. Technology should bridge gaps, not create new ones. With NeuraSense, we're giving voice to those who have struggled to make themselves heard, not by speaking for them, but by helping them find their own voice. The standing ovation that followed was immediate and unanimous. The sound filled the ballroom, reverberating off the high ceilings and polished surfaces. Technology journalists in the audience were already filing their reports predicting that NeuraSense would be the breakthrough story of the summit. As Zora left the stage, she was greeted by her father's embrace. The familiar scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and vanilla enveloped her as his arms closed around her. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I know," Zora replied softly, feeling the absence and presence of Amara simultaneously. "I felt her with me up there." The connection transcended physical separation, a bond that continued despite loss. 1 month later, Zora Phillips stood at the podium in the International Airlines Training Center, addressing the first cohort of crew members participating in the new Passenger Dignity program. The large auditorium was filled with flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service representatives, all there to learn how to recognize and address bias in passenger interactions. The room smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. The physical space itself transformed as part of the airline's commitment to change. Morning light streamed through large windows, creating patterns across the assembled employees, who watched her with attentive expressions. The seat itself was never really the issue, Zora explained, her voice carrying clearly through the room. It was about whose presence is questioned and whose is assumed valid, whose comfort is prioritized and whose is dismissed. The microphone amplified her words without distortion, allowing her natural cadence to reach every corner of the space. In the month since the incident on Flight 847, Zora had balanced her ongoing work with NeuraSense with her new role on the advisory board. The experience had transformed her in subtle but significant ways. She spoke with greater confidence now, more willing to assert her perspective in rooms full of adults who might otherwise dismiss her youth. The quiet strength that had always been her nature had found new expression in purposeful leadership. The Passenger Dignity Initiative isn't about special treatment, she continued, gesturing to emphasize key points. It's about consistent treatment, ensuring that every passenger's humanity is respected, regardless of how they look, how old they are, or what they're wearing. From the back of the auditorium, James Whitman watched with pride. In the weeks since his unexpected promotion, he had thrown himself into creating meaningful change within the airline. His suit was now a natural fit, rather than a costume, his posture that of someone growing into newfound authority. With Isaiah Phillips's guidance and Zora's insights, the initiative had evolved from a reactive public relations measure into a comprehensive program that addressed the root causes of discriminatory treatment. "What happened to me could have been prevented at multiple points," Zora told the audience, her gaze sweeping across the assembled employees. "The initial questioning of my assigned seat, the suggestion that I move despite having a valid boarding pass, the scrutiny of my medical condition, the tampering with my supplies. At each step, someone could have intervened based on clear, consistent protocols rather than individual judgment calls influenced by bias." As they gathered their materials and prepared to leave, a young Hispanic flight attendant approached them hesitantly. Her uniform was crisp and new, suggesting she was early in her career with the airline. "Ms. Phillips," she said, "I just wanted to thank you. What happened to you on that flight? It's happened to many of us too, in different ways. But until now, we didn't have the language or the support to address it." Zora thanked her for sharing, recognizing the courage it took to speak up in an industry where conformity was often valued over candor. The brief exchange confirmed what Isaiah had often told her, that change happens not through grand gestures, but through countless small moments of recognition and realignment. Later that afternoon, Zora boarded another International Airlines flight, this time bound for Boston. The experience was markedly different from her journey to Paris a month earlier. The terminal bustled with the usual activity of a major airport, but her path through it felt smoother, less fraught with potential conflict. The gate agent greeted her professionally, verifying her boarding pass without question or hesitation. The flight attendants were courteous and efficient, treating her with the same respect afforded to adult passengers. The routine procedures of air travel proceeded without incident, remarkable only in their unremarkability. As she settled into her first-class seat, 1A by coincidence, or perhaps intention, Zora reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. The incident that could have been merely a personal grievance had catalyzed meaningful improvements, not just for her, but for countless passengers who would never know her name. The leather seat embraced her, as she adjusted her position, no longer a contested space, but simply a place from which to view the world. Her phone chimed with a message from her father. NeuraSense patent approved. Legal team says we're clear to move forward with production. Proud of you, Z. The screen's glow briefly illuminated her smile as she read the update. Zora turned her attention to the window as the aircraft began to push back from the gate. Below, ground crew members guided the plane's movement with practiced efficiency, each playing their role in the complex choreography of air travel. The morning sun glinted off the wing, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted as the aircraft moved. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional and welcoming. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard International Airlines Flight 623 to Boston. My name is Captain Turner, and I'll be flying you today. Zora's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected to encounter Captain Turner again so soon. The coincidence, if it was coincidence, added an unexpected layer of connection to her journey. Before we depart, the captain continued, her voice carrying the warmth of genuine conviction. I want to assure you that every passenger on this aircraft deserves to be here. Every passenger deserves respect and dignity. And my crew and I are committed to ensuring you receive both. We've implemented new protocols to better serve you, and we welcome your feedback. It was a small addition to the standard pre-flight announcement, but its significance wasn't lost on Zora or the other passengers who had followed the Seat 1A story. Several people glanced in her direction, recognition dawning on their faces. The acknowledgement wasn't intrusive, but respectful, a quiet recognition of her role in catalyzing change. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Zora opened her notebook and began sketching ideas for the next iteration of NeuraSense. The journey that had begun with a confrontation over a seat assignment had evolved into something far more significant, a catalyst for change that extended far beyond one flight or one airline. And as the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, Zora Phillips looked toward the horizon with the quiet confidence of someone who had found her voice and learned the power of using it. The young girl looked nervous as she approached the podium, clutching her notes tightly. At 14, she was the youngest presenter at the Youth STEM Leadership Conference, and Zora Phillips, now 18 and about to begin her studies at MIT, watched with empathetic understanding from the front row. My name is Sophia Williams, the girl began, her voice gaining strength with each word. And I want to tell you about the day I refused to move. She shared her story, how a science competition judge had suggested she present in the junior division, despite qualifying for the senior level. How she had almost given in to avoid conflict, and how she had found the courage to stand her ground when she remembered the story of Seat 1A. When I held my position, Sophia concluded, her voice now steady and clear, I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up for every person who has ever been told they don't belong in spaces they've earned the right to occupy. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to move when others expect us to make room for their comfort at the expense of our dignity. The applause was enthusiastic, with Zora among the first to rise for a standing ovation. After the presentation, she sought out the young presenter to offer encouragement and exchange contact information. Your story reminded me of why what we do matters, Zora told her, recognizing in Sophia's eyes the same determination she had discovered in herself. It's not just about the technology or the achievements, it's about creating ripples that reach people we may never meet. As they parted, Zora felt a profound sense of continuity, a chain of inspiration and courage being passed from one generation to the next. What had begun as a confrontation over a seat assignment had become a touchstone for others facing similar challenges. And in that continuity lay the most powerful lesson of all, that individual acts of dignity and determination could create waves of change far beyond their initial impact. That sometimes the simple act of remaining firmly where you belong can transform not just your own journey, but the journeys of countless others who find strength in your example. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard and stories that need to be told. Have you ever stood your ground in a situation where others expected you to move? Share your experience in the comments below and join the conversation about dignity, respect, and the courage to remain where you belong.